Good morning, good morning, everyone. Let's get started with our seminar, The Political Vision on the EU's Constitutional Future. We have a program today. Welcome to all of you for being present. This is a S&D Group seminar, and this is a very important topic going into the future conference on the future of Europe. And I'm very pleased to have several personalities today, but particularly for the opening, Iratxe García Pérez, who is as you know, the president of the Socialists and Democrats at the European Parliament. Is also a Spanish socialist like myself. We're members of the same delegation, and we know each other from a long time, and I'm very happy, Iratxe, that I know your agenda. We all know your agenda is. I'm not going to describe it, but I'm really we are very thankful, myself and the colleagues from the AFCO working group, that you make the time to be with us, and also Paul Magnet, the party leader of our sister party in Belgium, and a European intellectual in its own right. And also we are very much looking forward to your views on this matter. So, Iratxe, por favor.
Thank you, Domènec, and thank you all of you to be here, because I always understand that when we are in a special moment in Europe, your presence here is a clear message for the commitment in our group to work together in this conference, Future of Europe. I will speak in Spanish, maybe some of you will need translation. Y comenzar, por supuesto, agradecer.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Domènec and the team from the AFCO committee for this initiative, because undoubtedly the S&D group is showing a particular interest in this conference on the future of Europe. We're aware that the people gave us a very clear message at the last elections. They said they wanted Europe, but a different Europe. And it's up to us now, as social democrats, as a progressive movement, to make that reality. The European project's change needs to involve everyone, needs to run across the board. Our responsibility as European political families, and it's important that we've got Sergei here with us from the European socialist parties. It's important to make our contribution as a parliament and also be able to include the people, organizations, associations, civil society, youth. We're going to be celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration on the 9th of May. That was the beginning of a unique adventure in the world. European countries chose their path to guarantee peace and to improve life for the people. In that declaration, it was said that Europe couldn't be created overnight, that it would be a constant series of changes and transformations based on solidarity. Solidarity, one of the main values of the European project, but also one of our main social democrat principles. And that's what I like to say in these open spaces when we have debates, when we talk about the crisis of the European project. Often we talk about the crisis in social democracy, and I think we have a lot of things in common, and that's the reason. And the most important thing that we have in common are those values that underpin the European project. So when part of society says that, it's a strong message for our political family. We need to be aware that it's the same values that we were defending 20 or 30 years ago: justice, solidarity, tolerance, diversity. We need to continue to defend those same values, but in a world that has changed very quickly and it has changed a lot. So we need to think about how we should be acting now compared to our actions maybe 20 or 30 years ago. Now we're talking about climate change, inequalities, the digital transformation, and the degradation of our rule of law. This is a unique opportunity to update the Union and its institutions, to give them the ability to face up to those challenges. And we cannot miss that opportunity. We might get it wrong along the way, but what we can't do is fail to try. We have more resources and mechanisms at our disposal to enable civil society and people to be involved. We need to include a broad participation from different sectors of society that represent different genders, ages, origins. We put that very clearly in our resolution approved by this European Parliament. Our colleague who is with us was in the negotiating team, and for her and for the other comrades in this group, the essential point was that we wanted that to be reflected in the resolution. That is, how can we guarantee these balances, geographic balance, gender balance, and ensure participation. Jean Monnet said we're here to unite people, not states. Now, some people continue to talk from a national point of view. Perhaps they don't want to realize that Europe brings us together. Together we're stronger. And in this complex world, we need to strengthen our voice. We're not here to build markets. We're here to build a community, which is much more than that. Now is the time to strengthen European democracy and to remember that we're here to improve the lives of people. When somebody decides to go into politics, they do it with the idea of how we can use our work to improve lives for the people. So that's an idea that we need to keep within our commitment. For a long time, the Union didn't do enough for the social pillar. Inequalities and poverty have increased, and that has led to an increase in populism. When we wonder why we have so much populism in Europe, we have to think and judge ourselves. We got things wrong. The policies were wrong. They increased inequalities and poverty, and that's the food for these populist movements. That's what enables them to recruit more people. So of course we have to have that reflection. Over these 70 years there have been great successes with Europe, and we need to acknowledge those successes in the same way as we acknowledge the failures. European citizenship is a great success. The Lisbon Treaty strengthened the role of the European Parliament, and the Parliament is the only institution in Europe directly elected by the people. That is a greater legitimacy for the Union, but it's not enough. We need greater spaces for debate to generate new ideas. Over 70 years, we've covered a lot of ground, and the European family has become larger. We managed to get up to 28 member states, but sadly, we lost the United Kingdom last week, and we're hoping that that too will make us rethink the European project. Look back on the past is a necessary exercise. We always need to look back. And we need to recall what unites us. But what's more important is to look towards the future with optimism. We can't get bogged down in nostalgia. It's very important because many times in these debates there's a degree of nostalgia which prevents us from moving forward. And I think we cannot get bogged down in nostalgia. We need to be building Europe every day. And for that, we have great responsibility in our political group and our political family to make that European dream reality. I'm convinced that this workshop is a great instrument to that end. Interesting ideas will be put forward. It will be a beginning. It's something to build on. And once again, thank you very much for being here. It's very important that you're here. You're obviously convinced by the need for our work. I'm sorry that I can't stay for the workshop. Dominic, I'm sure, will pass all the information on to me, all the contributions. And as I said, this is the beginning. We're at the beginning of a path, which is a long path, and I want to be there to travel this path with you.
Bueno, Irache, muchísimas gracias. Yo no he dicho.
Thank you, Irache. I didn't say at the beginning that we have interpretation in English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. I'd like to thank you for what you have just said before leaving, because you made some points of substance. I've noted a couple of interesting things, in particular the link between the European crisis and the crisis of social democracy and the need to unite the Union and its institutions. I think that's in line with the ambitions that we have with this workshop. Thank you very much.
Encore une fois, Chair Paul.
Paul, dear Paul, President of the Belgian Socialist Party, we are delighted to have you with us today. We know that you have always shown great commitment, and it's very important to us to have you with us today to represent the link that we have with the parties in Belgium. We're the European Parliament, and then we have the broader Social Democrat group. We've got Mr. Rodriguez, president of our think tank, FEPS. We have the president of the European Socialist Forum, and Irache, who's just left. And we've tried to bring together many different players from the broader socialist family, and you're here in your capacity as a socialist host here in Belgium, but you're also someone who has thought a lot about Europe. You wrote a doctorate thesis on European citizenship, and you've published many books. I found a book in a European bookshop close to here on Pasolini. So you are a true intellectual, and I'm sure everyone will agree that we're all ears about hearing your ideas on the conference on the future of Europe. And we've also prepared our document in the AFCO committee on our ideas as social democrats for Europe's political union. So, Paul, you have the floor.
I think it's very important we have this discussion this morning at the start of the process, because we all know there will be a debate about the future of Europe, but until now no one knows what this process will be. No one knows what we will make of this process, and we as Social Democrats have a very important role to play to define this process, and my introductory remarks will go into this direction. I would like to start by saying a few words about the Brexit. Because a few days ago, we were all very sad to see that a big country, one of the oldest democracies in the world, left the EU. And whatever we think of the arguments of the pro-Brexit, whatever we think of the fairness of the campaign, it is a fact. A big people in Europe decided freely, sovereignly, that they would be happier outside the EU than inside the EU. And this is a fact, and a very important one. It is very important not just for the EU, but especially for us, socialists, because we all also know that many people who voted for the Brexit, very many people who made a difference in the yes were people who for a very long time had believed that progress, social progress, solidarity were the strongest values, and who in the end changed their minds and thought that, well, maybe the nation and the isolation would be a better answer to their questions and anxiety than the progressive politics they had believed in. And this is a very deep existential crisis, not just of the EU, but also of social democracy. When the red wall of the Midlands falls, and the people in this region who have voted Labour for generations decide to vote to have the Brexit done, it's a question which is not just a question for our Labour friends, who remain friends, of course, and part of the European Socialist Party, but for all of us. And this is the reason why I think we should take this exercise, this reflection, debate, forum on the future of Europe very seriously. The EU needs a deep constitutional reform, and we need to say that. This exercise is not a constitutional exercise at that stage. It is just a political debate about the future of Europe. We need to make it a real constitutional exercise. We need to explain to the citizens that if we do not manage up to now to implement the policies that we believe we need to transform Europe and make their life better, this is in part, but in large part due to the fact that the rules of the game in the European Union are not fair. The rules of the game are not fair. The treaties, as they exist today, are not an impartial constitution which organizes the competition between different visions of the world, and the one who wins can implement the policy. They are an unfair set of rules which structurally favors liberal and conservative politics against progressive and green policies. And this is an argument that we need to make, even if this is not an easy argument in the political debate. The Single European Act was not fair because it organizes the internal competition and the fiscal and social competition within the EU. And if a German worker in the steel industry nowadays thinks that his enemy is a Bulgarian worker and not the big finance or the big multinationals, this is a big issue. And this is due to the fact that the rules of the game are unfair. The Maastricht Treaty is not fair either. The Maastricht Treaty favors one kind of monetary policy and one kind of economic coordination, which is structurally in favor of conservative and liberal policies. And the Stability Pact of 2006, Pact, 2 Pacts and so on, the post-2008 answer of the EU to the financial crisis, is the most unfair set of rules we've ever had, because it makes austerity the only possible policy and impedes all kinds of policies that we as progressive and socialists would like to not just conceive, but also implement at all levels in the EU. So yes, we have to have those two kind of debates on the issues. How do we have answers to address the concerns of the citizens, but also the debates about the democratic organization of the EU and the rules of the games, which will never make it possible to have a real progressive policies if we do not change them. We have to make this constitutional agenda a real agenda, and we as socialists have to say that if no one else says it. It's not just about more integration against less integration, more federalist against less federalist. It's about making sure that all political voices are heard in the EU, and that when you get a majority, you can implement the policies for which you have won the support of the citizens, which is not the case nowadays. So yes, of course, the Green Deal is very, very important, and we have to make the Green Deal the big struggle of the socialists. There are no Greens in the European Commission, there are little Greens in the national governments, there are Greens in the European Parliament, but we are much more important than the Greens, and we are Greens ourselves. So we have to make this a struggle of the socialists and say that, yes, the Green Deal can be, for Europe, an opportunity to really reshape and deeply reshape its own set of policies. The Green Deal can be, for our generation, what Keynesian reconstruction of Europe was for the generation of the post-World War II generation. They used the necessity of reconstruction to support wide investments everywhere in the EU, and this improved the life of millions and millions and tens of millions of people. Today, we need green investments everywhere, not just support for the big green tech, which is already struggling to get all the subsidies and say we need private more than public investments, but we need green investments in public mobility. We need green investments in a better isolation of the social housing. We need green investments in a green agriculture and organic agriculture to make organic food available and affordable for all citizens. And we need to shape this idea that by investing, public investing also, and not just private investing, everywhere in the transformation of our ways of producing and consuming in the EU, we will make the life of people better. They will live better tomorrow. Today, many, many people, especially people voting for us, people from the middle class, people from the working class, do fear this green transition. They think this is something for the rich people. They think this is something for the new intellectual generation living in the multicultural urban centers and not for them in their parts of the country. We need to convince them that by the kind of Green Deal, social Green Deal and fair ecological transition that we will support, this will be for them and this will improve their life, their health, the cohesion of their community. Second, we should not forget our key social agenda also. It's very good that we all speak of green, but we read first and foremost. We made, I think, a very interesting job, a group of people with Paul Rasmussen in this report, and I'm very sad that no one speaks of this report, because I think it's the best intellectual contribution of the social democracy of the last 10 or maybe even the last 20 years. This idea of a sustainable equality. We need to fight for sustainable equality, and equality on the one hand and sustainability on the other hand are the two faces of the same coin. It's a very sophisticated document. I really recommend reading it, because it was really a way of thinking of how we can change the policies and the decision-making process altogether, how we have to completely reshape and reframe not just the Stability Pact, but the whole system of the semesters and the coordination of the economic and social policies, and reconnect this to very simple and clearly defined social targets. One of the objectives that we define in this report, I say we, but I was a member with many, many others, and Lena and many others were members of this group too, under the very efficient leadership of Paul Rasmussen and our friend Katseli, was the idea that we can, if we want, eliminate child poverty in 15 years in Europe. It is possible. We made all the calculations. We know how to do. We know that offering housing, education, health, access to a good food quality to all children in the European Union, north and south, east and west, will make it possible to eradicate poverty in the EU. It is incredible that we do not manage to get big issues like that. China has incredibly reduced poverty. India has reduced poverty. Africa is in many countries reducing poverty. We Europeans are not. We are not reducing poverty anymore, and this has been the case for the last 30 years. How is this possible that we, the richest continent in the world, are not able to simply take such an important and such a moving target as one of the purposes that we could have? So yes, well, and this is one of the objectives that talks to everybody. Everybody thinks that fighting poverty is important, from the left to the right, and that eliminating child poverty, because of course we all have a lot of sensitivity for children, by definition, that this is something that can be a global objective supported for everyone. And of course, when we fight against child poverty, we fight against poverty tout court for the next generations. We can eliminate the process, and this should be one of the big targets of the EU. Going hand in hand with this ecological transition, which is completely complementary with this social purpose. So let's, dear friends, let's make this debate about the future of Europe a big political event. It's not sure this will be the case. It might be yet another talk shop in the EU. It might be yet another forum, and we will spend a lot of time discussing about the Presidium, how many members of the EP Commission, Council, who will be the leader, Vice President, what will be the process, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's take the time to talk about that. We need to fix that. That's the base of the process. But then let's say that this this is a very, very important process, that we want the socialists and the Democrats in the European Union to be the driving force of this debate about the future of Europe. It is a constitutional discussion. It is a discussion about the values and the struggles that we as social democrats want to put at the center of public debate, and about the rules of the games which needs to be changed if we want to achieve those ends. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very good discussion.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for this keynote speech. Something I did not mention before, you also ran for the European elections and you won, which is important because also in order to change policies, we also need to have a political majority in Europe, and we are still, the second group in the parliament, so we need to also be able to score more wins like you did here in Belgium. But if you have a couple of minutes before you go, just to comment on your speech, I think that you are putting in our radar the need to have a social constitution in Europe, because it is true that if you look at the current treaties, going back to the Single European Act and the Maastricht Treaty, constitutions have two main components. One is procedures, and the other is objectives, policy objectives. And it is true that on the content of the current constitution, so to speak, there is a neoliberal bias, no? That I think your speech has highlighted, and I think that's very important to us, the social dimension going forward, the social pillar. At the same time, constitutions have also procedures, and it's in that context that we may want to have also, in addition to your pitch for a social constitution in Europe, which I support, I think all of us support, also the question of federalism, because you also know that social policy in Europe or tax harmonization in Europe, you were talking about fiscal competition, we could have done more on that, but we have been blocked by unanimity in the Council. Yeah? So this is a reality. So that's why procedures have also to be part of the discussion. I don't think it's one or the other. No? I will just add to the goals you said in order to have a social pact. And I always wonder when we look at the Stability and Growth Pact that we have these punitive sanctions for debt and deficit, but you don't have a punitive sanction for having high unemployment. No? So this gives you an idea of where the priorities at the time of the Maastricht Treaty were put. But thank you very much, Paul, for being with us. I hope we can continue this cooperation and having you and the friends from the Socialist Party in Belgium contribute to our discussions, because we are in Belgium, so we have to take advantage of that. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And now we are going to proceed with the first panel. We have already Sergei in the table. Sergei is the president of the Party of the European Socialists. I think you have, we have to move the other panelists to the table now, no? Yeah. So Maros Sefcovic is not here. We will see the video message. We have Klara Dobrev, who is our Parliament's Vice President. So we have the organic part of the family, but also we have the institutional part represented here. Probably here. I think we're going to come with the tax now. Good morning. Alicia, the leader of the Young European Socialists. Lina Carr, the Confederal Secretary of our friends and companions of the trade unions. Welcome, Lina. Barbara Duren, the Vice President of the PES Group in the Committee of the Regions and the CIVEX President. Barbara, welcome and thank you for being here with us. And Johannes Koskinen, the Member of Parliament in Finland, in the Finnish Parliament. Welcome. Johannes, welcome. So I'm thrilled to have you all because, as I said before, this is a seminar. By the way, I didn't say it at the beginning because so many things, but I want to also thank, apart from all the interested parties that are in the room, particularly my colleagues from the AFCO working group that are present, Giuliano, Vladimir, Gabi Bishop, who also will speak later, Mia Petra as well. Well, I see Christel, who is not from AFCO, but is a MEP from our group, Rafael Glucksmann as well. I hope I'm not missing any other member. So thank you for, well, Mark Tarabella, I see. So thank you for being here, and thank you to the panelists because, as I said before, we want to have the overall social democratic family represented in a constitutional debate, no? Yes. So that's why we have a Committee of the Regions, we have National Parliament, we have Sergei, President of the party, Clara, Vice President of the Parliament, we have Lina from the trade unions because we don't want to do this debate you know, with our most important referent as a party of the working class outside you know, the political party structure, and Alicia, because, well, you represent the Young Socialists, so I'm sure you also have ideas for the debate coming from the youth wing. So thanks again. I think we start by the video from our commissioner, who couldn't be here, Maroš Šefčovič, who is a socialist commissioner in charge of the Conference on the Future of Europe. So let's start with the video, and then I'll give you the floor. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Do I have to put the sound? Or I don't know how to do it.
No. I think they have to.
Very timely, as it is taking the place shortly after the withdrawal. Dear Irache, dear Paul, dear Sergei, dear Domenech, dear friends, I'm very glad to see that our political family is taking the initiative to discuss a political vision of the EU's constitutional future. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you in person, but let me contribute with a few following remarks. This discussion is very timely, as it is taking the place shortly after the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from our European family. It is the right moment to continue with fervour to join forces and build a common future. We are much stronger when we share a vision as institutions, as nations, and as people. Therefore, it's crucial, even in the case of our constitutional future, that we engage with our national parliaments, social partners, civic society, or academia, precisely in the spirit of today's workshop. It proves once again that our political family is well placed to reach out and serve as a link to our societies. Needless to say, our citizens must be in the center. Many Europeans remain concerned about their future, and the European Union has to show that it can listen and provide answers. People's voice must be reflected in our strategic priorities. The upcoming first ever conference on the future of Europe will be a perfect opportunity for us to engage with citizens. I'm glad that our family is taking the lead in shaping this important agenda as well. First, I am convinced that for the conference to succeed, it must be a truly pan-European exercise reaching every corner of Europe. For this, all three institutions must be in sync, and again, national parliaments, regional and local actors be on board. Secondly, a feedback mechanism of the debates must be designed in a way that it is a true game changer. The ideas expressed should result in concrete recommendations for future EU action. It is yet to be seen whether this includes constitutional reforms, or whether we will use tools currently at our disposal but not fully exploit to implement and strengthen our European democracy. Dear friends, I will be keen to know the outcome of your discussions today, and I'm also looking forward to a continuous reflection with you so that our European rendezvous with citizens in May 2024 will see them inspired and engaged.
Okay, we had this very nice video, even with the European flags flying in the background, so that's very good weather. That's very nice of Maros, and also a few substantial points. Just a reminder that we're being web streamed. I didn't say at the beginning, so we may have some people following us outside, which I think is a good thing. And I encourage you, because we will try to come up with a publication. So if you are kind enough after the seminar to send, if you have your written notes for your presentation, so we'll try to put them together. And now I happy to give the floor to my friend and colleague in the Socialist group, Klára Dobrev from Hungary, and European Parliament Vice President, for your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for this opportunity, but let me make a step ahead of our Commissioner Šefčovič. Because you can see that the world has changed in the last 10 to 15 years. And some of the changes are wonderful and good. And some of them, how to be polite, well, they are challenges, actually, to all of us. The United States, which was alive for 70 years after the Second World War, now has a president who is not so interested in a stronger European Union. Or we have Russia, which was a partner after the collapse of the Soviet Union for long years, and now he's attacking its neighbors, among them our neighbors as well. And then we have China becoming one of the global superpowers, and still we don't see what are they going to use their power for. And of course we have the climate change, we have the digital transformation, we have the Brexit, and you name it. And then on the other hand, we have some changes within our European Union. I think, unfortunately, the memories of the 2008-2009 global crisis have not disappeared. The memories taught our people that if something happens wherever in the world, then at the end, it will damage us. And the other lesson they learned, unfortunately, is that they remain unprotected in times when they are most vulnerable. And this was a very bad lesson. And one can say, okay, I'm so negative. Not, in contrary. I think that those changes, those challenges, the world changed, the people changed, but this gives us an opportunity as well. I would really call you to look on those changes not as threats, but really as an opportunity. It's a great chance, as Iratxe said at the very beginning. It's a great chance when we can really make a difference. Ahead of us, the task is huge, because the threats I was talking about, they are global. But the fears, the anxieties of the people, they are not simply local, they are individual. So the task what we are heading is that we have to address the local, the personal, the individual fears with global answers. And this is not a small task at all. And I don't want to use too big and too emotional words. I would say the challenges ahead of us are different, but not smaller than those who were faced by Jean Monnet or Robert Schuman or the other founding fathers. Because now we really have a window of opportunity. Either we use it now, either we manage to change Europe for a stronger one, for a more democratic one, for a more successful one, or if we fail, well, this option does not exist, I think, and we are strong enough. And let me emphasize one other issue as well, that when we talk about a stronger Europe, you might say this is only a communication problem, but really, believe me, this is a political task. When we speak about stronger Europe, more democratic Europe, more successful Europe, then we have to speak about institutions and institutional changes. But unfortunately, institutional changes, as Sergei mentioned, no, Paul mentioned, I'm sorry, Sergei is going to mention it afterwards. As Paul mentioned before, well, institutional changes are not really exciting for our people. Our people do not want to hear and talk about institutions. They would like to hear about solutions. But I would turn it around again. Let's take it as an opportunity. We have now 1-2 years to talk about the individual fears, the individual problems of our citizens, and let's do it. And focus on the fears and desires of the people. And if you check, let me tell you some examples. If you check what are the issues which are mostly concerning the European citizens, then no surprise, climate change, migration crisis, economy, social security, social well-being of the people. These are the most important issues. And if we look at them a little bit, just on a surface, migration, I must tell you that if we are not able to provide a real answer, a real proposal, that on the one hand answers and responds to the fear of our millions of European citizens, and on the other hand it's humanistic, then we simply do not deserve the honors to serve the European people, not in this Parliament, not in the Commission, and definitely not in the Council. But if you see what we can do, then you will see and you will agree that partly the migration crisis has to be addressed at the place of origin. What would it mean? It would mean that the European Union should have been able to stop the bloodshed in Syria. The European Union should have been able to end the civil war in Libya, or to prevent 400,000 deaths of men and women in South Sudan, or to prevent Putin's invasion, or go on, you name it, plenty of places. But when it comes to foreign policy, the European Union does not exist. With all my respect to the High Representative and his team, who are doing a really good job. But, excuse me, a lot of the cases, they are lame ducks. And if you can ask why, then let me say some examples. The European Union was recently unable to condemn Prime Minister Erdogan for his invasion in Syria. How can it happen? I can tell you. Because one country out of 28 vetoed it. And just 1 year ago, the European Union could not sign an agreement with the Arab League, which would be crucial for the migration issues. Why? Because of one single veto. And then, somewhat later in April, one country again protested against the growing influence of China in our region when we wanted to have a statement about it. One veto. And then, what is the result of this? Who was negotiating in Syria? USA and the Russians. I'm not definitely sure that they were negotiating in the good faith of the European Union. Who protected the interests of the European citizens? If that's one of the main concerns, this security, who protected it? Nobody. And I have to tell you that hundreds of millions of simple European ordinary citizens can ask, are we insane? Are we insane that we are one of the largest community in the world, one of the strongest economy in the world, with 430 at that point, 440 million people, and we are simply not there. We are letting US and the Russians to negotiate a situation and take a decision, and the burden of this decision will sooner or later partly come back on our citizens. So, I'm not talking about institutions, you hear me. I'm talking about the desire of the people. But what's the end? That we have to have a common European foreign policy. That's a must. And if we do not do it, we are not going to be able to address the fears of our citizens. And that's the only way how Europe can be more effective. So the answer, we need a more federal Europe in order to address the security issue and the migration problem of our country. So simple. But let's have a look at another one. I think this is maybe the easiest one, the climate change, because I have the feeling that even the hardline Brexiters or national populists will not say that the climate change can be stopped at the national borders between France and Germany or Slovakia and Hungary or Spain and Portugal. I think even they're saying that this is insane. But again, to be effective, then we need more power, more sufficiency. So if someone is saying that we are in delay of addressing the challenges of climate change, then with the same breath, one has to say that we are in a delay to build a more federal, more effective Europe. And climate change is one of the issues which can prove it beautifully. And then, and I'm not going to go through all policy areas, but economy. This is one of the main concerns of our citizens. And economy, it means a personal, social well-being and security when you translate it to the everyday life. Ursula von der Leyen said several times that she wants an economy that works for people, which means social justice. Then I'm asking you, how is it possible that the European Pillar of Social Rights is still a declaration, a proclamation, and not an integrated and solid part of our treaty? How can it be if our goal is an economy which works for people? And this is so obvious again when you look from an ordinary citizen point of view. Who is able to protect our currency, our jobs, our living standards, our economy? Small member states with a couple of million people, or a huge community with 440 million people with one single currency? And of course the answer is easy. But then let's go again one step forward. Can you have a single currency? Can it be managed without a common economic policy, without a Minister of Finance? Can it be successful? I'm not talking about institutions, but I think the answer to this question again, we need a more federal Europe. Or I promise the last one, because I have a lot of examples. There is not a single person in the Union again who would say that it's a just and fair system where the biggest multinational corporations do not pay their taxes. How can it happen that the biggest one, who earn the most on our European citizens, they do not participate in the sharing the costs, for example, of our social security or of our common policies? And the answer is simple, because big corporations are much stronger than member states, even the big ones. Even as I see the negotiations, the biggest one. The big corporations are stronger than them. So the answer again is so easy. If we cannot do it alone, then we have to do it together. Then we have to have a tax system which is feasible for 440 million people. And when we talk and negotiate together, then there is no corporation which is stronger than the European Union. So we have to have a more federal Europe. And I can really go on. Okay, I'm not going to speak now about the new parliament, which has a legitimacy not simply equal in the decision-making and legislation, but has a lead role in the legislation. And I'm not going to talk about the Senate, a new Senate, which task is to protect the rights and interests of a smaller member state, and I'll leave it to the debates which are coming. The only thing all in on what I would like to have you, that if we are responding to the real needs of the people, addressing individual fears, and we provide them with those global answers, then the answers are simply very, very clear. And we have the opportunity, and we have it now, and we are not going to have it maybe in 4 years. We have it now. So what I would suggest, let's discuss, let's talk, let's argue, but tomorrow be brave and create the United States of Europe. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Clara, for your powerful message and also for sticking to the time. I didn't say it, but you did. So please try to stay to 10 minutes in your intervention. And just maybe one comment on your reference to climate change. It is true that if you look at the current treaties, it's mentioned only once. Because at the time of the Lisbon Treaty, this was not the topic that is it today in the preoccupations of the public agenda, of the public discussion. It was mentioned alongside environment only once, and of course no reference to objectives, carbon neutrality. That's nowhere to be seen in the Lisbon Treaty. So this is also important to bear in mind. And you reminded me something when you mentioned the failure to have a declaration with the first summit we had at the ministerial level with the Arab League about 2 years ago. And I was close to this discussion at the time when I was in Spain. And it was true, it was only one country, I think it was Hungary.
It was unfortunate.
And they vetoed the declaration because they did not want migration to be mentioned as a priority in the discussions between the European Union and the Arab League. But it was not because there was a specific position on migration they disagreed. It's just they opposed the word migration in the declaration. And that's why we failed to have a declaration, because of this single national veto, as you mentioned. Now is the time for our party president and also member of the European Parliament, Sergei, please.
Thank you very much, Dominic. I think it's a very timely initiative to have this workshop, because we are entering uncharted waters. We have to navigate in a very smart way through this period of time. By nature, I can say I'm an optimist, but there are many risks which we have to analyze and avoid. But when I say that I'm an optimist, I think I'm standing on firm grounds, because in the last European elections, we had 51% of Europeans who came out to vote for the European Parliament. It's for the first time, maybe in 20 years, that there was an increase. And this shows that people still believe in the European idea. But as it was said by Clara, it's a window of opportunity, and we shouldn't miss it. Because if this time we continue business as usual, we don't deliver on what we promised in our manifesto as a political family, then next time we may face a real crisis of representation of the socialist movement in the European institutions. There were very negative predictions about the last elections. Pollsters, analysts were saying that we shall come third, fourth in a row as a political force. We avoided it through a good strategy, strong candidate, and clear policies in our manifesto. But now we have to deliver. And the first thing is to learn from the lessons from the past. Because speaking of the Conference on the Future of Europe, we have to avoid that it is perceived as the Constitutional Convention in the first years of the 21st century, as something which is cooked in Brussels by the elite, which is focused on the institutions, and which is completely ununderstandable for the citizens. Because if we declare from the very beginning, we are for a federalist Europe, United States of Europe, immediately all the anti-Europeans will focus on it in a very negative way and present it like something of the elite. This is why we should be aware that this conference is started by the initiative of the Council as a dialogue with the civil society. So let it be a dialogue, first of all. Let it be open from the beginning. And let it focus on the real issues, and from the debates on the issues, the instruments, including institutional frameworks, procedures, should arise. Because, indeed, we are living in a new world. The changes are so rapid, so deep, that we cannot even intellectually understand them, not to mention to find the right answers institutionally in the current framework. Because, indeed, Europe internationally is very weak. This is one. And people care about it. if you go to Strasbourg, to the yard of the European Parliament, there are very interesting posters, which are based on a public opinion survey. 50 million Europeans voted in the European elections because they want a greater role of Europe in the world. 60 million voted for this and that. 40 million voted for something else. So people are expecting Europe to act and to deliver on certain specific issues. And we have to focus there. And on that basis to come to the next stage. Because otherwise we are also, as a family, risking one element. There are diverse visions in the family on a number of issues. If we try to structure from the very beginning our attitude, officially, then we'll have internal problems. And for us, first of all, the most important thing is coordination within the family amongst all factors. And we can influence substantially the process. We have the group, we have the Committee of Regions, we have the Foundation, we have the members of the national parliaments who will be part of this process. And this is why it is very important to have the check on the ground, to involve the national parliaments and our sister parties, our foundations on a national level, to have this debate out of Brussels, out of the bubble. Otherwise, nothing will work. And then indeed come to the real issues and name the problems. Which is the weakest element in the chain of the European structures? The Council, which is unable to take decisions on the most urgent issues like, let's say, migration or climate issues. And this is really essential to name and to look for ways how it can be more effective. Including this consensual way of deciding on too many issues is simply not working. But my point is that it should come from the real discussion based on the expectations of the people and then explaining why it's not happening. Because look, both the Commission and the European Parliament, with all the political divergences and confrontations and differences, have a proposal how to deal with the refugee crisis, migrations policy as a packages. And for 5 years now, the Council, zero. Empty declarations. The same about the new Green Deal. There will be the problem of the implementation. I'm sure that the Commission, because it's Frans Timmermans who is leading this process, will come with bold proposals, but then it will be blocked in many elements in the Council. And we have to communicate it to people and also show how these obstacles, bottlenecks, the narrow things can be overcome. And again, we really have to focus first on the policy aspect. What do we want to achieve for Europe? Where Europe is standing today? It's economically shrinking. In the world, it's not the global factor on major issues. It follows the others, doesn't lead. It doesn't cope with the technological change well enough. The Americans, the Chinese, others are leading in the digital transition, in AI. So we have to clearly identify the weaknesses, then to say, where do we want to see Europe? And on the third place to say, which are the ways to achieve these goals which can be formulated in this broad dialogue. I would stress one more time the importance of our internal unity and coordination. Because I think this was a key element that we came second and not third or fourth in the European elections. The unity of the family was preserved and we're working together in close coordination. And also, from the point of view of the Party of European Socialists, we shall be very active. As soon as March, next month, in Rome, will be the first big public discussion. All the parties, all the stakeholders from our family will be invited exactly to discuss our policy and our approach towards this process. This is why I'm saying that this workshop is very timely, because we need brainstorming, we need exchange in advance. We don't need, confrontation amongst ourselves, but to look where is the common ground and what we can do together. And generally speaking, this year, I would like to see our family to debate very broadly on all issues and very frankly, because I'm a strong supporter of the new Green Deal. indeed, it can be the new basis for policies which are transforming the mantra of the neoliberals, which is completely focused on the market. Because the new Green Deal, sustainable development, it's about changing about the way we think, the way we consume natural resources, the way we distribute, the way we preserve, and it's leftist in essence. But we have to avoid the risks, because there are many risks, because in reality it can be very painful exactly for our voters, for poorer people, not only in the regions which are mine producing or with thermal plants, but for many of our voters. And the only ones who can provide a just transition with enough financing, it's us. And again, I will finish with this. Our core identity is indeed red, as Paul said. And we have to show that we are ready to fight for it. We managed to have a strong impact on the Commission's work program, but we should prove that we can deliver on the social pillar, make it a reality, and when necessary, make a political fight, because we are sometimes far too consensual. This is why we are perceived as part of the status quo. We should show our red lines, and when necessary, make a fight, be identified as the right people for the right cause. Then we shall bring back confidence in our family. Thank you.
Well, Sergei, thank you very much for your input, and I have to say I'm really happy with having this discussion, because all of you are being very substantial and very clear in your position. So this is not. It happens sometimes that people just say very generic and nice things that everyone agrees, and then everyone is happy, but it's not a fruitful discussion. And I think what you say, for me, goes hand in hand with Clara's presentation, because I think if particularly, and something you said also, Sergei, the international environment. International environment is key, and you also mentioned at the beginning, the role of Russia, the role of the United States, the role of China and Europe. So to be stronger in the world scene, for me it's clear we need to have a stronger political unity inside Europe. For me it's very clear. Now, one thing is the goal. We can call it United States of Europe, is what the expression that Clara used. It's a traditional, it's not the first time we hear it. But what's the way to go about it? And I think you crafted a good, smart strategy. We cannot announce that the Conference on the Future of Europe is a constitutional convention, because it is not. It's going to draw the wrong kind of attention. And I think this conference should focus, as you proposed, in the main policy challenges: digitalization, ecological transition, climate change, foreign policy, social justice, an economy that works for all. And organically, this discussion about what else or what better we want to do together at the European level to tackle these challenges that by their nature are transnational and we cannot tackle only at the level of the member states, we will also have a reflection on institutions. But I think, if I understand you correctly, this will be an organic process in the context of the conference. What is important in that, I think we have to be clear, is that by the same token that it has to be an open dialogue with citizens, we cannot accept a council position that will exclude the institutional topic either from the mandate of the conference. So I think we should strive for an open mandate, a mandate that does not declare this is a conference to prepare a European constitution, but that doesn't say either you will talk about climate change, digitalization, environment, foreign policy, but you cannot talk about changing the institutions. So I think there is a reasonable, way of designing this mandate. But now I give the floor to Alicia, President of the Young European Socialists and a Spanish socialist too. Someone said, but there are many Spanish in this seminar. I said, yeah, but it's just, what can I do? The group president is Spanish, the president of the Young European Socialists is Spanish, I myself happen to be Spanish, but it's just a coincidence.
Gracias, Dominic. Y bueno, primero de todo, me gustaría...
Thank you, Dominic. First of all, I want to thank the assistants who came here today to this great debate. I also want to thank the organisers of the conference, the members of the AFCO committee, and in particular you for having invited me as president of the European Socialist Youth and for allowing us a sphere to debate. It's a real honour to share with these important leaders this sphere to talk about something as important as the future of Europe. Thank you for inviting the Young European Socialists for participating, because we are willing to fight for a more united, just and democratic Europe. We won't let you down. It's the future for us that we're talking about, and we believe that we can participate in its construction. Saying that the EU is at the most complicated and decisive turning point of the last decades is nothing new. After the economic crisis worsened the differences between states and the austerity measures imposed on voters who didn't want it, and the painful withdrawal process of the United Kingdom, it's kind of like we're waking up after a bad night's sleep, and now we have to decide what path we want to take. The path of more integration towards a more federal Europe and a more democratic and capable union, or there's the abyss of disintegration, which starts off with dismantling and follows then the differences between each state and ends with Brexit and the end of solidarity between our people. Young people don't want that. They want to continue building a better Europe. Over 80% of European young people believe that we should unite the countries of our continent. And they believe that this is more important than not having a union. In countries like Poland, where our colleagues are working hard to beat the authorities currently in power, youth are one of the social groups which are clearly in favour of European integration. Even the United Kingdom, the fact that 68% of young people do not want or did not want Brexit to happen is something that leads us to think that in the medium term, the perspective that the British could come back here might not be impossible. Young people are the hope of the Union, and the Union must take care of that hope. The European Union has a duty to democracy. Democracy is what differentiates us. It's a system that we are based on, but it's also a whole group of principles which unite us as pro-Europeans. And that's why it's crucial that we defend democracy on three fronts. In our member states, vis-à-vis populist nationalists who want to erode it, beyond our borders, with a foreign policy based on the promotion of democratizing processes, and also within the European Union. There are reasons for which we should be concerned about the health of democracy in Europe. Half of the population doesn't participate in European elections, and this gives momentum to the democratic deficit discourse. But I'm convinced that European democracy will reach its full potential, and the increase in participation in the last elections is a good sign and shows that the initiatives taken, such as the Spitzencandidate system, are moving in the right direction. In the conference on the future of the European Union, European young people are going to ask that the Spitzenkandidaten system be shielded and that all member states respect it. This mechanism provides visibility to candidates for each political family coming from various parts of the continent. It ensures visibility for the European project in the public sphere. And if we have more visibility, then citizens will be more interested about what is happening in Brussels. And when it comes to voting, they will participate more. It will be up to members of this Parliament to defend mechanisms like the Spitzenkandidat. And that's why we must also fight to ensure that Parliament's weight increases in the community legislative process. The right of initiative of the Parliament is a crucial step in deepening transnational democracy. Either we have the right to put forward legislation, or this Parliament is lacking a crucial aspect in order to allow it to be the house of European democracy. Oftentimes people repeat the mantra of young people being the future, and they do that too often. I believe that young people are the present too, and if we don't take care of young people now, then we will lose the elderly in the future. Today, many young European people are living in precarious situations. That's why promoting social justice should be one of the most important priorities for the Union. I know that redistribution is a responsibility of member states, but Article 3 of the treaty states that the Union will combat social exclusion and discrimination and promote social justice and protection. Although 1% of the if 1% of the European population has more benefits of economic growth than the rest, well, that's because the EU and its member states are failing in creating a just and sustainable economic system. A lack of justice leads to rage, and an angered population goes against those in power. The EU must do more to fight inequality. Otherwise, Eurosceptics will take advantage of its inefficiency to getting public opinion on its side. That's why I believe that the social pillar is crucial to guaranteeing the future of Europe. We must strengthen it, and we must strengthen youth policies. And that's why we need to constitutionalise the social pillar through a reform of the treaties. In addition, it would be interesting to focus more European budgets to programmes that would benefit youth, such as the European Solidarity Corps. More exchange programmes in Europe will mean more European citizenship. Let's give more reasons for young pro-Europeans to defend the project on the streets. Let's give more opportunities to those that are at risk of being seduced by the hate discourse and the discourse of borders. The European Union will be capable and autonomous, or it won't. These proposals, among others, are the ones that we young people in Europe will defend in the Conference on the Future of Europe. The document that's presented here today is complete, and it's a good basis for our work, our group, to take on the conference in an ambitious way. The European Socialist Youth wants to continue to participate and contribute, and that's why we ask that the participation process be as broad as possible and that youth fora be strengthened, and that we take advantage to ensure today that we give particular protagonism to those who will be the protagonists of tomorrow. So thank you very much for this conference. I think it's very necessary. We must continue having these spheres of debate. As a political family, I think it's important because there are some social aspects that must be dealt with. So thank you once again.
Bueno, Alicia, muchísimas gracias por darnos la visión.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for giving us an overview of the European Socialist Youth. You are an MEP, member of the European Parliament and President of the Young European Socialists. And you have set out an ambitious, clear agenda. And I've taken note of the issue of the right of legislative initiative for the Parliament, and you used the expression transnational democracy, which I like. Previously, when we've spoken to Paul Magnette, he's talked about federalism. That sometimes makes people run out of the room, but transnational democracy it contains the concept of a parliament that has full powers, such as any parliament. It can table legislative initiatives. It can open up committees of inquiry. It has the right of inquiry, as it were. We don't have enough of that. We don't have a right of inquiry such as a national parliament. And since 2011, the council has been blocking that initiative. And then there is the idea of more co-decision with the council. There are places that the parliament's excluded from in co-decision. Everything linked to taxation, setting own resources, social policy partly, and foreign policy. So I think you've put your finger on what's important here, building European democracy by building its parliament. And constitutionalisation of the social pillar, that is also linked to the material side of the constitution as opposed to the procedural side. And then I would add constitutionalisation of the Green Deal, ecological transition, environmental transition, as you were saying. That's not in the current version of the Lisbon Treaty, but Lena Carr will tell us more about the social pillar, the Confederal Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation.
For being here with us. For us, it was very important to have the unions, the labor movement, our main ally in the wider society, to be part of a discussion which is in part constitutional, but I remember at the time of the Constitution and the Lisbon Treaty, your call for the social protocol. I hope this is still part of the agenda. And also on the wider discussion on the future of Europe and the key challenges that you also consider that we must address in the context of this debate, in which you are invited to be part as key actors, as social partners, at least in the position of the Parliament, as you know, and we hope Council will be supportive. But the floor is yours, Lina.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us, and we are very happy to be part, because the European trade union movement has been part in the constitutional evolution and discussions for many, many years. We were part of the convention when the Lisbon Treaty was debated, and actually our former General Secretary Emilio Gabaglio's signature is on the document, because we were included in the process. But this is something we are proud of very clearly. But when we look at where the social partners stand in Europe, then very clearly over time our role has been clarified and developed. When we look at the 1986 Single Market Act, for example, it was the first treaty that created legal basis for the community-wide social dialogue. Then the Lisbon Treaty further emphasized the importance, and we have Articles 151 to 59, if I'm not mistaken, that all deal with European level social dialogue and social policy issues. And it also puts an obligation on the European Commission to consult the social partners in social policy field. But this is not the only role. This is what we have in the Constitution, and obviously when we are talking about the future or looking into opening possibly the Constitution, obviously our business is to make sure that after the discussions, debates, revisions, that we are still there, that our role is still maintained, and we can continue. This is kind of what we have formally in the Constitution, but when we look at what social partners really do, we are actually an important part, not only at European but also national level, of ensuring a better quality of legislation. And also we have a very long-standing role in setting, applying and enforcing fundamental social rights. And this is precisely through social dialogue and collective bargaining. This is our center. But when we look sort of what have been our demands or asks throughout the processes or the history, also debating the Lisbon Treaty, then we are actually very much on the same page, because we were asking for qualified majority voting to become the usual procedure for definitely for social policy, but for us also for taxation. There are important aspects of economic governance that need to be changed so that we actually could have the social market economy that the Lisbon Treaty claims the Europe to be. We need social governance, because at the moment it is, we see that many social fields get stuck in the Council precisely because of the unanimity requirement. We cannot make progress, we cannot move forward. And the most recent example is the access to social protection for all, where we started actually discussing with the Commission, we started discussions and negotiations for a directive, and we ended up with a recommendation. So, and one of the reasons, it's the recommendation on access to social protection. And one of the reasons that was given to us was precisely that the directive will never get through because it's unanimity. So it needs to definitely change. So inclusion of labor and employment councillors in key representations worldwide. This is a demand that has been through in our Congress, various Congress debates, but this is a consistent demand in our trade policy for trade union movement. Because how can we have fair trade relations with our partners if we only deal with the liberal pure trade part and we don't look at the social issues? And if there are no experts who actually understand the social issues in Commission's representations worldwide. And of course, the Social Progress Protocol. This is still very much on the table and it hasn't disappeared anywhere. And also we had our Congress last year in May, and we renewed our call for social contract for Europe, or renewed social contract for Europe, because we feel that it's broken. It's not working any longer. So we need to renew it. And part of it is definitely the Social Progress Protocol that gives workers and trade union and social rights the primary role, primary status. Because we also see that a court decision, European Court of Justice decision after another, these rights are eroded. And I'm not even going to enter onto the free movement of workers or posting of workers, because we see that yet again, just before Christmas, we had a decision that undermines any fairness in working conditions, any fairness in pay for posted workers. Yet again, we are facing the same problems. I'm really glad to see that the document that the S&D Group has prepared for the conference on the future of Europe actually has many of the same demands that we have in our action program from the Congress. And just to mention a few, for example, a demand for the European Treasury. In macroeconomic policy, for example, the reform of the Stability and Growth Pact, or the changed mandate for the European Central Bank. We need a European Agency for Tax Coordination. When we look at economic governance, then a minister for economy and finance was mentioned. We go further, we also ask for a labor minister. And we want these two ministers to be in charge of defining inclusive policies, promoting growth and social justice, and setting a clear path towards ecologically friendly economic development in Europe. Human rights. There is still the issue of the EU's accession to the European Convention of Human Rights. And by extension, then the European Social Charter would apply to European Union, including the collective complaints procedure. When we look at the Green Deal, environmental change, this is all very important part of our work that we do. And we fight to have that when we are talking about environment and environmental transition, that we don't forget that when we enact policies to protect our environment, that there is a transition, and it tends to hit hardest the most vulnerable in our societies. So when we are talking about transition, we also need to talk about socially just transition. We have to make sure that when policies, tax policies are enacted that there are also protective measures to support the people who would not be otherwise able to cope with the effects. And just to mention briefly the three different institutional positions that we have in front of us, because it is not obvious to everyone that trade unions should be included. In the Parliament positions, we are there. You have proposed a very concrete role, and I'm really thankful to Gabby, who has, I think, fought our corner in the group and in the European Parliament, so that we are there. But at the same time, when we look at the communication from the Commission, we are not there. There is just a mention of possibly national social partners, but European-level social partners are nowhere to be seen. I haven't seen the full document of the Coreper from the Council yesterday, but what I have seen, there are no social partners at all. So the question is, how does the Council or the Commission imagine this process to really function if they do not include important actors? I'm not only advocating the European level, but also the national level. It is impossible, but they don't foresee a role. And another big question mark for me, looking at the Coreper document, is they want to limit also your activity and contain it only in the strategic agenda that they adopted. And I thought, how ridiculous can they be? How can they say that we will have an open dialogue, we will have a civil dialogue, but we only talk about certain things?
But this is the result.
So I think you have an enormous fight ahead, and we will support you every step of the way to actually get a sensible mandate for the conference on the future of Europe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Lina, thank you very much for laying out the labor movement's agenda in just 10 minutes, and also for getting into the discussion on, because what we're having today is an early attempt. We wanted to be the first political family to start the discussion on our political position going into the conference. But it is true that the conference is, from the methodological point of view, is still a work in progress. It's not yet finalized. We have a position from Parliament. We have a position from Commission. It seems yesterday emerged a position from Council, which is not very uplifting, to be diplomatic. And you're pointing out to fundamental issues. Gabby will talk about that in the second panel, and she will give us the state of the art of the situation. But we are going to have a tough negotiation with the other institutions as Parliament in order to have an open mandate for the conference, and in order to have a guarantee that social partners are included and other organized civil society. And after this negotiation, which is not going to be easy, we will have a joint declaration that will officially launch the conference, ideally on the 9th of May, taking advantage also of, as Irache said before, the 70th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration. On the content, as you said, I see a lot of alignment with our proposal, but there are also other things that you mentioned. So I encourage you, because the document is a work in progress as well, so I encourage all of you that have read it to send further input to the document, and this idea of the labor minister, for example, and other things. So we will be in touch so we can enrich further our document. Thanks a lot, Lina. And now is the time of my friend here on my right, who has been sitting patiently and listening to the other colleagues, Barbara Duden, from the Committee of the Regions. Your president, and the Committee of the Regions is someone that we have also called, as well as the Economic and Social Committee, to be key players in the conference. You are the president of CIVEX. You may want to also explain for everyone to understand what is CIVEX, but also you are the vice president of our group in the Committee of the Region. So in these two capacities, I think your input is very needed. So please, Barbara, on to you.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich würde gerne auf Deutsch sprechen.
Thank you very much. Let's speak German. I'm from Hamburg. So I'm not going to start with a quote from Helmut Schmidt. People often say that he said the vision should have gone to the doctor. The EU was a visionary project and it needs to remain so today or become so once again. And European integration needs to strike a balancing act between the big ideas and move on from the vision of peace of 1954 and look towards sustainability again. We need to look at the need to take concrete steps, and we've got decisive decisions to take, even though sometimes that's hard to do. To that extent, I'm very happy that today, once again, we're talking about a political vision of Europe for the future, and we're looking at the constitution as well, because the issue here is urgent. What kind of constitution does the EU need in order to meet the important issues for citizens, and what kind of instrument, procedures and resources do we need to achieve that? 18 years following the Convention on the Future of Europe and 10 years after the entry into force of Lisbon, it's not only legitimate but essential to ask whether today's EU is fit for purpose for the future, particularly because we've had a lot of new accessions. We've had one country leaving, or half leaving, as it were, and there have been other big global technical changes. Against that backdrop, we need to have as broad-reaching a debate as possible in terms of how to act for the future. And not so much talking about the big vision of what's important for Europe and for the future. I think the agreement in Europe is that there are a lot of national and regional specificities that need to be taken into account, and looking at sustainability, the change in climate policy and so on, digitalization, and the way that our societies are getting older and way migration has changed the picture. There are all of these challenges need to be reacted by our political social system, and we need to fight the threats of division in the social and political world. We need to look at the role of Europe in the world. Those are the big questions that are being discussed everywhere at the moment. But even if we do agree about those big issues, the debate about the constitutional future of Europe begs the question what instruments and what kind of constellation we have here in order to deal with those challenges. We need to look at them from an EU perspective as well as an S&D perspective in Europe. I don't think this means that the big questions of institutional details of the EU system is what we need to concentrate on yet, although the Spitzenkandidat system and getting over the vetoes of individual countries are important parts of the solution. But we need to deal more generally with the issue of how we reflect the different democratic levels in the EU. And unfortunately, I have to use the word multi-governance, how to put this together to make all levels stronger and bring responsibility to bear. One of the specificities that aren't used enough in making Europe stronger is to deal with the multi-layered level of it, local, regional, and European levels, making sure that it works in the interest of democracy. Firstly, in looking at the real problems, also having the right political solutions to this, because legislation and its implementation, financing, auditing and holding politics responsible is essential vis-à-vis citizens. This idea of multi-level governments in the current EU is more explicit in some places than others. In cohesion policies, it is visible some places, but that's not the case across the board. There are areas such as migration policy where it's officially ignored, but we're all aware of the fact that that fundamental element of Europe often doesn't get across to the public. We know that all too often politicians deny it or don't talk about it, and this is something where we need to have the right approach to deal with the difficult issue of bringing Europe closer to the citizen. At a national level, political way, fear is often promulgated and blaming the EU in terms of what it can't do, shouldn't do. And we need to cooperate and make things easier for everyone, make things more transparent. To that effect, it's not the same as the convention of 18 years ago in terms of delineating competences. We're looking more at coming closer together and being more visible in terms of bringing competences together or limiting them. For voters, it's not so important whether the EU or national level should deal with things, but it's to do with financing or financing things from a local, regional or EU pot. But citizens want proper solutions for the problems that they have. To that effect, I think that the Conference on the Future of the Union, regardless of what political view you have on things, will be a good opportunity to put across these issues to different citizens from different interest groups, and also get politicians on all levels, not only in Brussels but across the EU, to look at these things. And the Committee of the Regions obviously needs to take part duly in this conference, and that's something that I think, if I may say so here, we need to be more than what the European Parliament looks upon the COR as. And we're very happy to be here so that with the Parliament and the Commission we can have as broad and decentralised a debate as possible. What's important for me particularly, and I think I speak on behalf of my S&D group in the COR, is that we need new links and new methods to ensure that the various levels come together, and so that everyone can bring their particular experience and skills and democratic tools to bear. Political parties need to play more of a role here, but that goes for European level as well. We need to have proper flows of information from towns, villages and regions to the national level up to the EU level. We need to strengthen all of that so that we better use the experience we have, and EU policy can better reflect that. This means that the idea that the COR has, not just during the conference but after the conference, we need to look at the structural elements of having permanent structured participation. And in many local and regional areas in Europe, there's experience we can build on. But also, we need to make sure that the elected representatives on various different levels take each other seriously, and that they take common responsibility for the future of the EU and respect that. If the conference helps to breathe new life into the debate and mobilise people on this issue at the moment, then I think the conference will be successful. And finally, it goes without saying that from our point of view, we need to be clear that these talks and debates that we'll be holding need to lead to concrete proposals at EU level and others within political negotiations, so that there are no taboos. That means changes to the EU treaties need to be considered, including the issue of how such changes will be possible without unanimous votes from all countries. Thank you very much for allowing me to come and present that to you today.
Well, thank you. Vielen Dank, Barbara. It's not much that I can say in German, but thank you all for again, in just a minute, giving us a very good overview. And I like you mentioned the question of multi-level governance. No? I think that's also key, because Alicia mentioned transnational democracy, but in our case it's a multi-level transnational democracy, no? Multi-level, and the role of the local level and the regional level. And I thank you also for your clarity on your last remark. I think no taboos. I mean, it's not the age of taboos anymore. Maybe when you think about Brexit, you see some people in Britain that are convinced that they were told they were not joining in a community of values, that they were only joining in a free trade area or a common market. No. I mean, if anyone still has any doubt about the EU being a political project, it's the time to disabuse him or her of that reality. Now, our last speaker in the panel is Johannes Koskinen. He's a Social Democrat member of Parliament in Finland, so I hope you can also give us the perspective of national parliaments and whatever else you may want to add to the discussion. So Johannes, thank you for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting also a representative of 27 national parliaments, but I try to keep it short. First, I want to join to those remarks Sergei said about the big picture, how we approach to these problems. It's better to start with a political agenda and then find if there are needs to change institutions or treaties. I also support those ideas Alicia, Lina and Barbara gave from their points of view on the social partners representation and local and regional representation and the civil society participation in the process. But of course you are not surprised if I say that national parliaments must be included in the process of planning the future of Europe. And it's maybe easier to follow the same methods that were in the earlier conventions, that there's a parity between the representation of European Parliament and the national parliaments, and not to create very new structures if you have had a well-functioning form of this kind of work, and also that the social partners representation there could be safeguarded. European Commission contribution shaping the conference on the future of Europe a couple of weeks ago has its merits, especially in connecting the conference with the EU's headline ambitions as set out in the Commission's 6 political priorities. All these priorities demand political actions and legislative measures both at European and at national level, many of them also at local and regional level. And also most of the institutional reforms which might be needed require approval by the national parliaments. So then it's quite natural that the representatives of national parliaments should have equal influence as European institutions, according to the same principles that were followed in earlier conventions. My second point is about this approach to these sectoral competencies. We need to analyze how we can reach these political goals that we as Social Democrats have, and we as a European family have. The updated policy framework with the new social, economic and ecological goals is well described in this AFCO S&D working document from November, and it has been elaborated later. But we need to analyze carefully if there are lacking competencies at union level and what kind of arrangements bring real added value and stronger results, help to achieve prioritized goals. And there is this contradiction that this general Europeanistic or federalist view of transferring widely executive authority towards the Commission and legislative powers towards the European Parliament will not easily be accepted in the national parliaments or in the national politics as a whole. It's not only on social democratic parties, but in the political discussion as a whole. But then these sectoral solutions might be more realistic to achieve if they enhance policy efficiency. And especially when we have these global challenges, climate change, environmental issues, global taxation needs to have international and global arrangements. There we can clearly show that we need European level decision making, and it need to make it easier. So going from the problems and our policy agenda towards these needed institutional or treaty changes is a better way to go further than speaking generally about more federal Europe or that kind of things. It's maybe better to speak about better functioning Europe or more energetic Europe, more efficient Europe, and then to combine the same political efforts we made at the national level with these European level efforts. So this is my message to have this kind of a functional way of getting things done and not try to have too difficult issues on the agenda. The third point is that these institutional proposals are very controversial, and they are that for good reasons. Personally, I think that the Spitzenkandidaten process or introduction of transnational lists tend more to alienate citizens from European politics than add democracy or create stronger European political platform. I was in the press presidency during Poul Nyrup Rasmussen's time and also Sergei's time when we then introduced this Spitzenkandidat. And this discussion was then already, it was first accepted as a trial. We will see what happens. But the method has not been very fruitful, I think. And if we think about the history, the best Commission president ever, Jacques Delors, would never have been a Spitzenkandidat and wouldn't be accepted as a president with this method. So we could also argue that it's better to concentrate on struggling between ideas, political ideologies at the European levels and in the European elections than to try to find great European figures to try to market them in 27 countries. Then these other ways to how to strengthen democracy, that to have better say for European Parliament in issues of having more transparency and accountability of the institutions, especially between Commission, the Council, and European Parliament. That is the way to go further. And it might also be a part of this process when we find out that there are difficulties to have better use of European budget, and then you should have more this kind of monitoring powers for the European Parliament, and that might be also part of this process after we have found these problems and try to find solutions. So these improvements might be a more natural way towards better functioning European democracy than starting from the kind of a federalistic structural views of what we have in different think tanks. But as well, I think that with these compromises we have to make for the work of the future conference, so we'll find a good way, and as Sergei told, this political debate inside our political family is very important, that we have all the levels, European, national and regional, local level involved, and this Commission's view that we need a kind of a communications project is not enough. It's of course we need that, but we have to have a clear structure also for this decision-making, planning of what we'll do for the next years. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Johannes. I think it's good that we keep in mind the difficulties and the views coming also from national politics. Maybe I very much in agreement when you talk about emphasizing transparency and accountability as ways to improving European democracy, and this is something we support, and we will have support in the public opinion for that. But also because of accountability, I think it's important to increase the powers of the European Parliament. But that doesn't mean that we are eroding the powers of the national parliaments. The fact that we have the right of legislative initiative does not erode in their own field of competency the role of the national parliament, or the fact that we have the right of inquiry does not erode the right of inquiry of national parliaments. No? So I think we have a way also, you know, I see that you have a fear for this generic call of federal Europe, but maybe we have to also discuss what we mean by that, because of course if people think that this is a massive transfer of competencies to the European Union, of course they are going to be against, and I'm going to be against myself. I don't want the European Union to run the schools or the hospitals or the social services from Brussels. But I don't want unanimity in the Council, and that's clearly a federal principle. And I don't think most pro-Europeans will be opposed to having qualified majority voting. You were mentioning the problem with the Social Protection Directive, that it had to be abandoned because it required unanimity in Council, or the fact that we have more co-decision also in the field of social policy than we have now. Those are federal principles. These are the real federal principles, like no unanimity in Council and full co-decision with Parliament. If this still creates confusion, we will have to be pedagogic, no? But it's not about centralizing and running all possible policies from Brussels. We have the next panel, but I think it will be a bit unfair not to allow, and I know my staff is going to be very upset with me, but since I'm here, to allow at least MEPs present to take the floor if they want to react to the panelists or make a point. So is it Javier, Vladimir, Mia Petra, and Rafael? But we are 15 minutes late, so if you could make your point in 1 minute, otherwise we will run out of translators, interpreters, I mean, for the second panel. So, Javier.
Sí, gracias, querido Domenic.
Thank you, Domenic, and thank you, Chairman. First of all, I apologize for arriving so late, and I also have to leave as well. I'm sorry, but we have different meetings going on at the same time. I just wanted to offer my great support to this process, the support of the entire Spanish delegation. We believe that this conference is necessary and that it needs to be held within our political family, and the Spanish delegation will make a contribution. So I'm not going to talk about structures. The Parliament has proposed a structure. I don't think it's definitive because I don't think Council will accept it, but we'll see. I'll talk about the objective, though. What is the objective? Well, yes, we can make changes. I'm not talking about making changes to the treaty, but as was said about the Spitzenkandidat system and the national lists and the Parliament's initiative, or eliminating votes in Council with a qualified majority, that's one side of things. But if I go home and talk about this, people are going to say, well, what does that do for my life? So if the objective is to get closer to the people, and the people say, well, yes, after this conference, Europe will provide this and that for my life, these changes for my life. So it's very important to listen to the people, and if we have 3 or 4 very specific ideas and we succeed in them, then the whole thing will be a success. When I go to Strasbourg, I have the entire extreme right in front of me. And if we're talking about a conference on the future of Europe, they'll criticize, they'll say they don't like this, they don't like that. But we will be setting the agenda. We won't be talking about their agenda. They can talk about Brexit, they can talk about migration, whatever they like. And that alone would be a success. So let's get down to work so that that conference can start on the 9th of May. I do apologise. I know it's not very polite, but I have to go because I have other engagements. But I wanted to leave you with those thoughts on behalf of the Spanish delegation. Thank you very much, Javier, for being here and for those very specific comments. Vladimir.
2 brief comments. First, nobody can deny the Parliament's right to talk with the people, with the Europeans, and to listen to them. And in particular, it can take the form of a conference. That is why I'm afraid that maybe a kind of mistake has been already made when we accepted the concept of calling for the conference by all of the European institutions. It should be the initiative of the Parliament, open to partner-like cooperation with other European institutions. But it is our target, our right, to set the goals for the conference. Second comment. I can support everything that Klára Dobrev said about the circumstances, about the problems, challenges, threats, risks, etc., etc. But I personally believe that to deal with all of those issues with some positive effects, results, we need to have public opinion, European public opinion on our side. I mean, those of us who believe in stronger Europe, stronger European integration. I personally prefer not to talk about federal or more federal Europe, just to avoid senseless ideological discussions. It's easier to convince the people that we need strong or stronger Europe, I believe. And to have the public opinion on our side, we need to have European public opinion. To have European public opinion, we have to create such situation in which people all around Europe can discuss the same issue, can answer the same questions, etc. In my speech during the plenary discussion, I mentioned something that I was talking already among some of us earlier. I personally believe that we should start the practice of consultative European referenda, and that conference is a perfect opportunity to start that kind of mechanism which could last also after the end of the conference for the future of Europe. Otherwise, all of our declarations about making the European Union more democratic, more accepted by the people, will be just verbal, empty declarations. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. I think now it's Mia Petra, no?
Thank you. Thank you for the very inspiring panel to get started with. And I also think that we had a very good appetite for the conference as we worked in the AFCO and then the European Parliament, and then it flattered down when we read what the Commission was really about, even it was the initiative by the von der Leyen, and then also the Council, we don't know what they actually want. And it was also actually not at all a constructive one, that it was more that the regions and local events, and then MEPs were not kind of mentioned. I also think that we were having the talks with the citizens last summer. I did 50 cities in Finland, and what was it if it was not the dialogue with the electorates, and it will continue. So it is also that this parliament has it, and its roots and DNA, and for me, the conference was then something more, and it was the open doors, institutions together. And that goal, having the institutions together with open doors, doesn't exist today. We do not have a forum that Commission, Council, and the European Parliament never meets. We have one single commissioner every now and then talking in the future programs that there will be white paper on AI. I have been listening Breton 4 times in 2 weeks' time. So yes, there is a dialogue. There is even structural dialogue in the committees that they come, and then we wait what they will propose. And of course, with the socialist commissioners now there is a better, and then the chair, and then the ministers they meet. But as institutions, we look maybe like a fighting ones. And if we then go for the future, and there will be decisions on the future, even there is not treaty change, which I politically think is maybe a dream and not a fact. So I don't want to also pave the way that only the treaty change will make Europe better, because then we are having the risk that Europe will not be better. Maybe my question to you is also that how do you see the political reality today and at this moment to go out and have these goals with the countries going very strange? The country Clara knows best is a bit strange to look leader meeting with the Italian fascist forces and still being in the EPP, but then still as a country leader. So this political reality at the moment is the question. And then my second comment on this institutional thing. I have been very happy to see Pier Virgilio here as we worked together in the 90s. And then I still like this idea that it is the institutions that create our possibility to do the politics. But as a political movement, if we don't have clear ideas what we want, but we say more democratic Europe, so it doesn't touch the people. And my colleagues from the AFCO, they know that if I go campaigning in Finland that, yes, now you should ask for more democratic Europe and less commissioners. So you will not have a Finnish commissioner. Please vote for me. I will campaign for that. Maybe reality is different in Italy or Spain, or that you get more people to vote socialist when they require not having own commissioner. I don't know. But this kind of tools. And then I see the same people willing to, have this flexibility not to have the commissioner. At home, they have more than 10, 20 or even 30 ministers. Why? Why the reality is so different here? Then I do see the commissioners busy. I do see the MEPs busy. So if we want to respect the political system, we have to respect the politicians and then the democratic rules on all the level. So comments, but there's a question is political reality today. Is it then that the populists will use this fora and how to tackle that one?
Thank you, Mia-Petra. Raphael?
Merci, merci Dominic. Je pense que...
Thank you, Dominic. Well, I think it's very important for us to have this debate now. I'd like to thank the speakers for what they've said. I'm quite worried at the moment if this conference doesn't lead to more than a sideshow, then I think we'll once again be in a waiting pattern and we'll have disappointed the citizens of Europe. So the issue is, how do we build the agenda which is more ambitious than here than in other political groups or institutions of Europe? The only way to do that is to involve civil society much more than the Commission wants, or the Council, I imagine, and try and have a lot of citizens involved. And the least of it at the moment is that we're not going down that route at the moment. The Commission and Council's proposals are very weak in terms of involving the people of Europe. So I think there's a power play going on. I agree, we perhaps shouldn't open with federalism or not at the moment, but if by the end of the conference we don't have proposals that allow for more federal institutions and federal democracy in Europe, then the whole thing will have been pointless and worse, because by communicating without really changing European institutions, once again, will disappoint European citizens and put them off our political discourse.
Rafael. And now we move to the next panel, but thank you very much to all of you. Thank you for the very substantial contributions. We will continue the discussions in the future, and we hope you can come with us. And, yeah. Yeah, of course. No problem. No problem. Thanks a lot. So please now I invite María João Rodríguez, Vice President and former member of the House, Valerio Onida, former president of the Constitutional Court of Italy. Olivier Costa, from the College of Europe in Bruges. Pier Virgilio D'Astoli, president of the European Movement in Italy. Francisco Aldecoa, professor of international relations of the University of Complutense University in Madrid and president of the European Movement Spain. And Gabi Bischoff, S&D, MEP, and vice chair of the AFCO committee.
Very good initiative.
I think it's going well. Very. Hi, Gabi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good to see you.
Welcome. So, who are we missing? Valerio, no? Oh. And thank you for the participants to staying for the second panel, which is never a given. Huh? So now we have had a panel which we have called the political and institutional actors. Not that the present panelists are not political actors, because you are also political actors. But you are also now working with, in the academia, in the think tanks, in the wider civil society. So I'm pleased to give the floor for the first speaker for 10 minutes, the person on my right, Maria Joao Rodriguez, who is a former colleague in the European Parliament, but above all a very committed socialist pro-European, a friend. Now you are the president of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, which is the think tank of the European Socialists. And you are very committed to play a part in this debate on the future of Europe and on political union. You are committed personally and also institutionally from the FEP side. So very thankful for joining us today. I welcome you to the European Parliament, which is an institution you know very well. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dominic, and my congratulations for this beautiful and useful initiative. I will try to be as useful as possible for the debate by building on my experience as politician, making the tour of the different European institutions and being part of the final negotiation of the Lisbon Treaty. But also, of course, as now I have the hat of president of the European Foundation for Progressive Studies, I can speak extremely freely, and I will do. So let me tell you how I think about this. And I was paying careful attention to what happened here in the previous panels. The first thing I would like to say is that this exercise of the Conference on the Future of Europe will take place in a very special context. Very different from the one we had when we ran the European Convention and then we negotiated the Lisbon Treaty. All this happened before the big financial crisis. I remember I was in Lisbon, European Council, when we concluded the deal on the Lisbon Treaty, and we were so happy with the big progress. But one year after, 2008, we're dealing with the backlash of a big financial crisis. And this has changed the world, because the backlash brought a kind of nationalistic reaction to the fact that the neoliberal agenda was pushed to the extreme. And we are still in this new context. And we should be prepared for a particular context where Brexit being negotiated, so a good expression of this nationalistic trend. Let's see what comes in the American elections. And what will be the consequences of the American elections to the future of the multilateral system, which, by the way, will be discussed in New York in the General Assembly this year. And how we Europeans, we imagine our future in this new context. So the Conference on the Future of Europe will take place against this background. Now, I think we need to be prepared, let's say, basically for 4 main scenarios for the European future. One is to muddle through the status quo, the inertia, not being able to cope with the new challenges. This is bad. But we can have even worse. We can have a scenario of national fragmentation. Then we can have a third scenario, which can give the idea that we have a pro-European push, but the pro-European push with a liberal approach, focusing on making trade deals, strengthening probably European defense, going deeper in the European single market, and not much more than this. This agenda will be on the table also. Well, my deep belief is that we, progressives, social democrats, we should push for a fourth scenario. And this fourth scenario should be based, most of all, on deepening European citizenship in all dimensions. When it comes social rights, when it comes now environmental rights, so important, but also when it comes political rights. I think this should be our compass. Why? Because if we want to really overcome the inertia, the muddling through we have been over the last years, we need to mobilize a big political force. And this big political force can only come from citizens. So the starting point of this conference, from my viewpoint, should be about citizenship. What is our concept of European citizenship? And now let me be precise. I think that some steps can be taken. First of all, yes, over the last years we could launch a European pillar of social rights. This should be given stronger political and, in fact, constitutional force. Secondly, we need to add new rights. Example, environmental rights. This will become central for the next period. More than this, we need to make sure that these rights are portable in European space. Portability of rights is extremely important. This also means that we, European citizens, we should be able to accumulate our rights and to make them portable in other countries. This is a big transformation and a big effort of coordination of our social systems. And I will mention a step further, which I believe is necessary, is to create at European level a kind of safety net for basic social rights. When it comes access to education for all, when it comes protection in unemployment, when it comes underpinning basic rights against poverty or basic retirement rights. So I'm trying to be as precise as possible. For me, these are possible developments when it comes a concept of real European citizenship. And this is a powerful way to mobilize citizens to support the European project and to move forward. Then I agree, which was said in other panels, that from this we need to draw the implications for policies. I don't intend here to discuss, because also I don't have time, models of the architecture of European integration. and the so-called F word, so the federalism. But there is something very clear in all the available literature, is that whatever the evolution of the political system, we will also always be a sui generis political system. There is not another example to copy in the world. Example, to be more concrete, is completely impossible to transfer to Europe the kind of American federalism. Because most of our competences are so-called shared competences between the different levels, European level, national level. This is completely different from the American federalism, where we have a clear distinction between competence of the federal level and competence of the national level. So this is not possible to transfer to the European case. Let's be clear. So we are inventing something new. But now let me be precise, because I really think that most of our competences will remain shared competences, but I believe that some policies need to count more on the European level of competence. And which are these policies where we need to strengthen the role of European Union? I see three main fronts: strategic autonomy, internal cohesion, financial means. Strategic autonomy, first of all, when it comes foreign affairs policy, this was already underlined, or when it comes defense, well, in connection with NATO, for sure, but we do need a proper defense capability. Then, in strategic autonomy, the international role of the euro will become crucial. We are seeing this in the Iran crisis, example. And then we need to have a proper European industrial policy and a stronger research policy, if we really want to have strategic autonomy. In this power race we have between the United States and China, this will be totally crucial. When it comes to the second front, which is internal cohesion, well, this is about implementing these new social rights, as I was studying, but also to close the divergences between regions, because they are widening. So we need to have the means to close these differences. And this brings us to the issue of the financial means. Because this involves the role of the European budget, but there is a big difference. If the cohesion policy financed by the European budget is based on some limited decisions of solidarity to a region or another region, or if it is based on ensuring European citizens' rights, wherever citizens are. This is a completely different concept of cohesion policy. So we need a cohesion policy to make sure that citizens, wherever they are in the European Union, they can count on some basic rights. So this is a new paradigm for regional policy. Then this budget should also be, once and for all, aligned with the political electoral cycle. This is not yet the case, but we can make it for the next phase. Extremely important to deepen the democratic ownership of decisions on budget. This should be complemented with a new version of the Stability Pact, because in fact the Stability Pact as it is constitutionalized now enshrines austerity in the treaties. So this is a fundamental problem. Finally, taxation. Yes, we need to address European taxation. First of all, because we need new own resources for a more powerful community budget. But also we need more coordination of taxation as a whole, a convergence on taxation effort, because this is the condition to provide equality of rights. This is an issue of fundamental to a new architecture of the European Union. We cannot call for equal rights if we don't underpin equal rights with equitable effort of taxation. I'm pointing the finger to an extremely difficult issue. I'm completely aware this is extremely controversial, but that's my luxury of being president of a think tank, so I can say whatever, okay? Then, implications of these shift in policies when it comes the institutional framework. And as you saw, so far I have not spoken about treaty change. I'm keeping some ambiguity about this for obvious reasons. But yes, we do need changes in institutional framework. I would argue in favor of a major rebalancing of our European political system in favor of the Parliament and of an elected President of the European Commission by the Parliament and taking into account the outcomes of the elections. So this is what in French language is called basculement. Yes, we do have different national political systems, more presidential or more parliamentarians, but most of our national systems are more parliamentarians. And somehow we should reflect this at European level. So I think that somehow the role of the European Council as collective president should be reduced in favor of a European Parliament with full powers and electing a president of the European Commission with the right to choose his or her team. So is to align the European political system towards our parliamentarian tradition, which is predominant in most of our countries. And these will have major implications. Because so far the European Council portrays itself as the president, a collective president, at least setting the agenda and also taking some crucial decisions. I believe that it would be better to have another balance.
The French model.
Exactly, inspired on the current Gaullist French model. Our French colleagues, they understand me very well. This will be a major rebalancing. This means, once and for all, that the President of the European Commission should be elected on an organized Spitzenkandidaten model. This also involves a more clarified role of the European political parties, because they are still proto-parties. We do need real European political parties in conditions to organize transnational lists. So this also implies a change in the political party system. Even I must tell you that we have a political party system much more organized today than we had when we concluded the Lisbon Treaty. It's interesting to underline this. Finally, when it comes to Parliament itself, yes, I use the words a real European Parliament, mentioning the following developments: extending co-decision in the policy fields where we still don't have co-decision, power of initiative, and full budgetary power, including over taxation. Last but not least, go beyond representative democracy. To have an organized framework for citizens' participation, consultation, and even playing a role in decision. From this viewpoint, the institutions we have are somehow old-fashioned. We have now new tools, including in the digital area, which allows us to go much further. And again, I think the European Parliament should take the initiative to invent these new forms. Of course, I know that your very good document points in this direction. Final point I must refer to, sometimes there is a taboo, but this is my duty as president of a think tank. The classical discussion we have about the geographic organization of the European Union will come back. First of all, because of the effect of the Brexit. Then because we have a painful discussion on how to deal with Western Balkans, so possible enlargement or not. And also because we keep the Turkish issue in our hands. And so the discussion on different circles will come back. We need to be prepared for this. From my viewpoint, in progressive terms, we should say we are against European architecture in different levels. We can accept different speeds, but not different levels. Different speeds in the sense that, for particular reasons, some member states might will to go deeper earlier. When it comes deepening the Eurozone, when it comes building up European defense capability, when it comes now addressing new challenges such as cyber security or energy security. This might happen, and we should not block this. But it's very important that to say if there is a movement to deepen European integration, this should be always be open to all of the member states willing to join. It's a very important principle to restate. My final word is the following. The Lisbon Treaty is an incomplete work. Let me just recall this. Because when we were in the convention, we were discussing the institutional architecture and the policies. But then we had no time to update the policies. Because the European Council told us, finish. We no longer wait. And that's why the Lisbon Treaty changed the treaty. It is quite substantially when it comes to institutional architecture, but changed very little when it comes to policies. So this is updated. Outdated in the social area, in the Eurozone. Now will be even more outdated regarding the digital, the energy, the migration. So this is the situation we have. But I do agree that, first of all, we need to start from the concerns and the problems as they are felt by our citizens. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Maria Joao, for laying out this very complete agenda for a stronger European democracy. No? And I think the focus on rights is also very important and original in a way, because when we discuss institutions, we discuss the powers of the parliament, the rebalancing relationship with council, but in the end it's about empowering the citizen politically and socially, as you said. So I think we should try to add that to our document and our discussion going forward. fully in agreement with you. European federalism is not going to be US federalism, so it has to be our own creation, and with our own, based on our tradition of parliamentary democracy. In the end, what we want to do is a, transnational parliamentary democracy. We already have it, of course, but we can improve it with the things that you proposed, and also is the. I think your last comment on the Lisbon Treaty is very pertinent, because we have to do our work, our proposal for the constitutional future of Europe in three aspects that are interconnected but are also different. Which policies that are not currently in the treaty we want or are, but not to the extent that we need, with which procedures, how do we take the decisions on these policies, co-decision, more co-decision, without unanimity, and with which resources, right? The question of financial means. These three things, no? Which competences, with which type of decision-making, and with which resources, no? So thanks again, and you're staying for the debate afterwards. So now, I switch to Italian. Per dare il benvenuto a Valerio Onida.
I just want to welcome Valerio Onida, President of the Italian Constitutional Court. We're very happy to have someone like you here with us today, someone who is well acquainted with constitutional affairs. I speak Italian better than English, really, so I prefer to introduce you in Italian. Thank you for being here. You have the floor. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation. I apologize because I'll speak Italian, not to claim for the usage of my own language, but only because I can better express my thought. And I couldn't get my intervention translated into English in advance. L'Europa Unita.
Europe historically is as historically united. It didn't come about as a result of an abstract design or a confluence of interests or an economic calculation linked to different interests of a group of countries. It came about from precise political vision, and we have to go back through centuries to look at the way that different people have lived together, different languages, cultures, religions, and they had intense experiences of cooperation and trading. If you think about art in Europe, that has really shaped the continent, but there have been different kingdoms, empires, principalities, nations, and cities that make up Europe. But what really changed after the Second World War in terms of integration is something that Robert Schuman said on the 9th of May 1950, giving the essential justification for the creation of the first European community, that of coal and steel, and saying that it wasn't to do with having a common market, but to give life to an instrument that would make a new war in that part of the world not only unthinkable, but materially impossible. And steel and coal were instruments that came from the war, but it was putting them under an influence that was not French or German, but common. So the idea of Europe came back from living together under international law that went beyond the old setup of states that want their own external absolute sovereignty. And whereby you could either negotiate or go to war. To that end, the political Europe came before the economic Europe, and that was possible partly because in European countries after the war, political forces came about that people fully believed in. They were national parties, but what they had in common was a vision of international cooperation. Against that backdrop, nationalism that reigned until the Second World War and pushed ahead European politics. If you think it wasn't just to do with multinational companies, but conflicts, territorial conflicts. And in the 1930s and the 1940s, that became extreme. And it was the justification of fascist regimes. That kind of nationalism is something that we need to say goodbye to. We can't call ourselves nationalists. We can't see national nations as powers that deal in war and conquering. We can't be inward looking and deaf to what is happening in the southern part of the world. We've seen a different force going through Europe following 50 years of Cold War in Europe. But if you look at the foundation of the UN and the universalist ideal of human rights, with the end of the Cold War, with the fall of the Soviet Union, reunification of Europe, of Germany, and having those countries brought into the EU that were outside before, all of that allowed for us to stand together within Europe. Without that context, Europe would just be a place on a map. The question now is, how much do our people and our governments still believe in European ideals? The difficult journey of European institutions, starting off with the failure of the community of defence, the resistance in some countries to the unification politics in some countries, and then European economic and monetary convergence. And this is something that where there was a misbalance between economic institutions and political institutions, with the sad departure of the UK, has led to coldness from Eastern European countries towards Europe, and we need to go back to the beginning and reinforce the important values. If you look at Italy, then you'll be aware that 20, 30 years ago, the basic consensus regarding political unification was pretty much unanimous. In 1989, at the third election of the EP, the Italian Parliament endorsed a constitutional law regarding a popular referendum about European unity, and that was propped up by the Communist Party and the Christian Democrat Party, as well as 3 regional councils, and that had the say-so of all political groups, from extreme left to extreme right. In 4 votes in both chambers, there was only 1 vote against and 1 abstention. The issue was, if you think that we need to transform our European community into a union with a responsible government, with a parliament, giving that European Parliament the mandate to draw up a draft European constitution. Now, that referendum took place on the 18th of June 1989, and the turnout was 80% of voters, and it was favourable to the tune of 88%. Only 12% were against. As you know, that happened with the treaty on the 29th of October 2004, but that didn't get through because of the referendum in France and the Netherlands. But it was finally ratified in 2005, once again with votes that were almost unanimous. in the chamber, only 28 against, 5 abstentions and 16 against in the Senate. Now, only 15 years have passed. Italy came into the Eurozone in 1999, and the economic Europe made steps forward, but not the political Europe. Now, in Italy, there is growing scepticism in the face of political unification. We've seen more nationalist utterances. People often talk about the need of defending national interests and often say they fly in the face of other European nations, if you think about what's happening in Libya. So what's happened to have led to such a quick turnaround in the popular consensus regarding European unification? The UK has decided to leave the European Union with a referendum, with not a huge lead, but was quite controversial. In other countries, including Italy, people seem to want to go away from the idea of a unified Europe. It's not just to do with the economic crisis, which needs more unity, not less, or to do with international balances or disbalance, whereby an ununited Europe flies in the face of such tendencies. We need to find more peace and justice between nations, and that's something that's anchored in the UN Charter, which the Italian Constitution repeats in Article 11. We need to learn from what happened after the Second World War and put an end to the myths of nationalism, which are quite bellicose. These are things that we need to put paid to. This is something that the founding fathers of Europe believed in. What we need, first and foremost, is a new awareness of politics and culture, and that needs collective intermediate organizations between citizens and institutions, not only at local and national level, but at European level. What we really need is European parties that can promote and put around the idea of a newly unified Europe. Italy, from that point of view, has seen the negative effects of the collapse following what happened in politics and the judiciary in 92 to 94 of its historic party system. But in 1989, there was almost unanimity in terms of the new European Constitution. European parties exist on paper. If you look at what they originally required, those political powers that led to building Europe in the first place, those parties at the moment basically empty labels. They're ways of organizing political forces that are more and more national as time passes and very different between themselves. These European parties should start a common thinking process, and we need to identify ourselves and take political initiatives by which we can breathe new life into having a united Europe, the kind of Europe that the founding fathers fought for, and that is responsible to those who they represent. Thank you.
Valerio, grazie tante per
Thank you, Valerio, for that speech. I think it's very important to talk about what we want to do now, the international situation, the links between the national level, the European level, but your speech has made us think about the original ideas behind the European construction process, and there are constitutional issues here as well. If you think about the Schuman Declaration from 1950, there's a lot in that. that it's not all about war, it's not just building one thing. You talked about African development, and if you look back to 1950, about how long-term all of this was, but political unification, you talked about that, that's very important. Looking at the Common Steel community, that was the first step towards European federalism. So there are constitutional issues that have been around for a long time. Now, thinking of José María Gil Robles, the ex-EP president, who said that Europe is a constitutional process that's constantly underway, and it's constitutionally constantly reforming. Thank you very much. Once again, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Professor Aldecoa, Professor from the European Movement in Spain, and Professor from the Complutense University in Madrid. He's been dealing with European issues for about 30 years as an academic and as an activist fighting for Europe. I know that you've got a very detailed speech prepared because you've submitted it to us, but please stick to 10 to 12 minutes.
Por tu presentación y por darme la oportunidad de estar aquí en este.
Thank you very much, Dominic, for allowing me to be here and to give my speech to you. I've been listening very carefully. I've written down a couple of things that I've heard, and for that reason, I'm not going to follow the text that I've got.
Voy a intentar trasladar pues, la voz de la sociedad.
But I will try and put to you the importance of the voice of civil society, which is what I've put into the document. And I know that it's not great to read. It's good to improvise. But I've listened to a lot that's come up on this panel and the previous ones that I was very happy to hear. Starting off with thinking about the working document from November from this group, from the socialist group, the AFCO committee, and it's very clear, and it's exactly right in its approach. But I'd like to tell you about how I feel at the moment, which is that the European political climate has changed. And it's something that isn't in the Spanish media, but if you look at the Eurobarometers for the last 3-4 years, there's a big change in terms of how people see it, particularly since the one from November. That confirms the 7 previous ones, which cover Brexit, June 2016. There have been huge changes in terms of European perception. At the same time, there have been several opportunities. There's a big opportunity here. Having got through the huge crisis, there's a huge opportunity which allows us to think of a new direction by means of the conference, the convention, the intergovernmental conference as well, I think, which and we need to go through all of these steps. But this new changed situation, I think we need to look at what happened. First of all, my text started looking at the Schuman Declaration, which you alluded to, of 1950. And that's where the European Federalist project began. And that's what the text says. That's the first step towards European federalism. And obviously, the story of 70 years is building a federation, which is the title of the paper that I prepared. In that federation that's being built, well, it's not finished. I'm one of the professors that believes that the current model is of intergovernmental federation. Now, me and other academics look at the idea of the fact that we're a federation of citizens and states, and it's very clear in Constitution 1 it comes as a result of what nations and people want. But then in the Treaty of Lisbon, 80% of the constitution is included there. And it moves on to the model of federalist government. That model that is talked about here in the EP, well, there's a counterweight, there's a governmental counterweight. It's quite clear that future changes that we need to implement need to reinforce the federal nature of that, the intergovernmental. But I think that the conference has come about in bringing us a great opportunity whereby over the last 3 years, Europe has had new impetus thanks to, I have to say this, although it's a shame, because the UK has gone. Over the last 47 years, they've been standing in the way of building a federal Europe, and that's not just empty words. In Maastricht, on the last day, the UK Prime Minister was looking at Article 1, where it talked about a federal Europe, didn't want to have that in the text. So we don't have that in that anymore, but we need to include that thought. So from my point of view, what the conference needs to do is important. We need to make the most of those 3 new instruments which explain a new legitimacy that we've had from the last 6 months. When I talk about the new European environment, the first thing is the May elections, May last year. And the turnout was 10% higher than before. And that's important symbolically and factually. You need to be aware of the fact that the UK no more than 35% voted, and the countries of Eastern Europe were similar, 35% turnout. So that's the same as 94, even though enlargement happened in those countries. Participation rates are very low. So if you look at that, there are studies that say that 62% in other countries is the turnout, and that's great. The President of the Commission has come about as a result of the electoral outcome. Now, lots of people would have liked to have had the Spitzenkandidat procedure involved, but the treaties were invoked, which is Article 1777 that says very clearly that taking into account the outcome of the elections, the Council will nominate a President for the Commission, as voted on by the EP, and that's what happened. 15th, 16th of July, you voted for the candidate, 9 votes of difference, but almost absolute. But that's what the newspaper said. What we need to remember, those of us who believe in the project and want it, is that on the 27th of September, you approved the full commission with 75% of people present, 70% of the chamber. So that is a lot of support, but I don't think that any prime minister of any of the member states is similar to that. It's hard to find similar examples. That means that this commission is much more legitimate than others previously. So you need to make the most of that huge impetus. It's part of the new European politics that we're on in at the moment. And then the last Eurobarometer was very clear. So 70-80% of the media in countries like Hungary want to withdraw competences such as internal markets, tax, foreign policy and so on. But that's the opportunity that we need to grasp. And the conference, I'm not sure how it comes about, but what's important here is that President van der Leyen, in her inaugural speech, said that she wants to convene a conference on an equal footing with society, and said very clearly that treaty reforms on the cards. I believe the treaties need to be reformed for economic reasons, for specific reasons, because of migration we need to change a fiscal and external policy because of the passerelle clauses. But there are various reasons there. But in terms of the conference, I think that we need to take citizen awareness. That's something that comes up about in surveys, but we need to hear from people's mouths directly. That's what the conference needs to do. So it's essential for the conference not only to include institutional representatives, but on an equal footing, as President von der Leyen said, there need to be representatives from civil society. I represent one of them. It's European in nature, and it's the Spanish Federal Council of the European Movement, and it started off in 1949 in exile in Paris, and then it developed a lot and produced things such as Munich, I'm not sure if you remember, where for the first time in a seat of the European Parliament there was at the same time internal and external opposition, and that came about because of the international socialist movement, and the Spanish people agreed, and there were key roles in Spanish transition there for us as well, and that meant that the junta changed, and that all happened in our offices on the Gran Via in Madrid, feeding into the Spanish movement. And I am the chair of that movement. And we're at a time in which I think we have legitimacy to do what we should have been doing right since the start. And some august academics studied in The Hague in 1948. We really need the transformation that the conference will bring us. And I think that the conference needs to bring Europe closer to the citizens and the citizens closer to Europe with direct relations. You shouldn't just have institutions on their own. We need civil society, direct civil society, taking a key role as they have over the last 70 years, and particularly in certain areas. There are parts of that movement that have a lot of weight that they can bring to bear. I don't believe in quota elections or by lot. I think we need to be clear. We're still fighting about how all this is, like Asterix and Obelix. I was the assistant of a Spanish MEP in '86, so I'm very close to these issues. So I want civil society associations to be part of this, of the conference. Finally, I think that the conference has its role and its new methods of doing things. Move on from the convention. The convention was great with the constitution, and then as the Lisbon Treaty rescued it. But we need to move on in coming closer to what people's real social needs, the needs of society, and we need to change our method. And then afterwards, that's when the convention and the institutions come in to give things a legal form to that project of people. And then I think, although there are different interpretations of this, we need a treaty that's reformed. So I would like to thank you for bringing all of this up. In terms of this new political time, you're doing a very important thing. This is something that we all need to do, civil society as well. We can all play our part. Thank you.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, querido Patxi, por...
Thank you very much, Patxi, for that summary of that document.
Publicación.
Yes, well, if you would like to add with some of the things that are not in your paper, then feel free. What you did was break down a myth, and that is that there are many people in Europe that do not support the project. And you used empirical evidence for that. Many journalists and opinion builders have gone down that route in Spain, but not only in Spain, as you've said. Improvement of Eurobarometers following the Brexit referendum is clear. Sustained support for the EU and the euro, as we've seen over 20 years. Increase in participation in European elections, and a clear victory for the political parties. Based on that, of course, we can bring Europe closer to the people, but we can't say that the nationalist populists won, as some are claiming. They didn't get 30% of the chamber, certainly not. And as you also said, there are certain things to think about relating to the conference. I'm going to give the floor now to my colleague from the parliamentary group, Gabi Bischoff, President of the Constitutional Affairs Committee, who is also the person who represented the Socialist group in the European Parliament's working party that drew up our position, that is, the European Parliament's thoughts on how to organise the Conference on the Future of Europe. So, Gabi, thank you very much.
Gracias. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here in this very important debate. And I have to say, I'm coming from a party that 1925, between the two wars, took up in their program the demand for the United States of Europe. And we have seen that over the years, the perception of what we mean by this, what is our vision and what is our idea how it should work, changes over the time. And we are now at a time where we also as a party have to redefine what our vision is and where we want to go. And I think I would also like to remind that 1955, Jean Monnet started the Action Committee on the United States of Europe. And he did not start it with the governments. He did start it with politicians, with parties, and at that time with the social partners, meaning representatives of trade unions and employers' organizations. And what they wanted to create is a vision, a proposal, and to mobilize the citizens for this project. Because if they would have left it to the governments, I have my doubts that we would be here where we are with a European Union. And as many people said, we are now at a point where we really, after years of crisis and for the first time having a member leaving us, that we have to regain this spirit and this force. And as Maria said, it is the citizens that can develop this sort of mobilization if we do it right. And I have to say, we are here meeting at a crucial point. Yes, I think we have a good paper to discuss the content and the architecture, where we want to go. But we also have to discuss the strategy. And I have to say, yes, we worked very hard in the European Parliament to have a broad consensus on a concrete proposal and a resolution. And we achieved this. But we are at a crucial point. And the point is that the Commission did a communication that is neither cold nor warm. They don't, I mean, in former times, the Commission was a motor for integration. But now, if you look at the proposal, it says, yes, we are waiting for the Parliament, and we are waiting for the Council, and we are open to everything, and yes, we want to do citizens' consultations, but we always said in the Parliament, we either play it right now, or we should not do it, because we will frustrate people. We said, We want a meaningful dialogue that leads to concrete proposals. We don't want a dialogue to have a dialogue. And if I look at the draft proposal for the document and the position of the Council, I say, if we don't develop much more pressure now as civil society, as politicians, we will not have that. We will have a conference, yes. So we are talking about the same, but the structure they want is not to have an institutional panel where you really have feedback loops and an exchange with citizens and civil society. But what they want is a couple of conferences, one in the beginning, one in the middle, one in the end, with different stakeholders. Yes, national parliaments. Yes, also European parliamentarians. Yes, governments, but not an organized, structured process where positions can build up with the support of debate with civil society and with citizens. And this we should not allow to happen, because we have to be aware. This is, and you all said it, this might be our last chance to really reconnect Europe with the citizens and to move forward. And if we don't do this, I fear that Europe will continue to do business as usual, to muddle through, and in the end, this will be a slow death, but it will be a death. And therefore, I think we really have to see we have a big responsibility at the moment. I think, therefore, it's a very timely debate, also because we, as the S&D group, we have to be the motor. We are the motor, but it means now that we have to speak out and that we also have to convince our friends in the Council to not allow this to happen. Thank you very much.
Gabi, you've been shorter than I thought. I was expecting more, because I was liking a lot what you were saying. But I think that you're right. We need to be very tough in our negotiation with Council and Commission to raise the level of ambition for the conference.
Can I say?
Yeah.
Yes, I didn't want to repeat, because I said the main points were said here. We need to rebalance economic rights, economic freedoms and social rights. We need a real democracy. Maria drafted it out in a very perfect way, and I think we don't need to repeat it, because this is the DNA of our party. This is our position here, and I think, but now I think it's a crucial moment where the next step are decisive if we will ever come to something like this, or if we just repeat what we did in the last 2 years. We had citizens' dialogues, thousands of them, and we had a little report to the European Council, and nothing happened.
Thank you very much, Gabi, for your contribution and your hard work on elaborating the position of the Parliament, which I think it has been universally endorsed by all our allies. The SPD is a key political party in our European Social Democratic family. We, as a European Socialist Party, we are part of the European Movement International, so that's why I'm also very glad that we have 2 people from the European movement. We are part of that structure, and we share certainly we share your ambitions. Per questo do la parola.
So, I'll now pass the floor to Pierre Vecino D'Asli, President of the European Movement Group in Italy. You've done a lot of things. You were a more direct collaborator with Altiero Spinelli, one of the founding fathers and author of the Ventotene Manifesto, among other things. In 1942, this manifesto stated that Europe should be a Europe of workers. So there was this idea of the social Europe that already existed in the manifesto. The Ventotene Manifesto was not just a federalist one, it was also one in favor of a social Europe. So, Pier Virgilio, if you can, in 10-15 minutes, please give us your presentation. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation here today. And thank you to the Socialists for organising this debate. I read the group's document from November, we don't have we have some changes taking place and we see some moves backwards. So it's worthwhile to examine this document in light of what happened in weeks following the 15th of January. There was also communication on 22nd of January. And some documents which are not published or official, but you also have the General Affairs Council report of 28th of January, which is worthwhile reading closely too, as is the draft of the Croatian presidency sent yesterday to Coreper. Reading these documents, it's clear that we are far from an agreement on the main issues. We don't have an agreement on the content of the mandate of the conference. We don't have an agreement on the conference accepts. We don't have an agreement on governance. We don't have an agreement on the outcome of the conference. So there's no real agreement anywhere. Allow me, if you will, to say the following. We're facing two opposing visions, and I'm going to try to sum these up using legal language. The first stance now, the first vision. On 24th January Council meeting, we saw this, and it's also clear in the text presented by the Croatian presidency. It's an unmoving stance which claims that the conference should deal with things that are the responsibility of established power, and that's the authority which should develop agreements relating to EU policies as they are today. If you read closely the debate which took place in Council, if you read the Croatian presidency text, it's quite clearly stated that the balance between the institutions must be respected, the one as we know it today. As we know, the balance between the institutions that exist today allows for the intergovernmental system to be more prevalent. I won't use the expression intergovernmental federalism. I would prefer to say confederation rather than intergovernmental federalism. So first of all, governments as a whole, with no exceptions, say that we should respect the balance between the institutions, the one that exists today. And the second point they say is that we must respect the principle of all inclusiveness, so all states together. And third, this is written in the European Council conclusions of June 2018, I think, we are the owners of the treaties. That was written in a European Council conclusion. And finally, a final agreement which they found, and you'll see this in the French-German non-paper. According to this, the conference can debate for 2 years, have recommendations, and then the recommendations will be attributed to the European Council, which will then discuss and decide. So if this is the outcome of the European Conference, then it's better not to even hold the European Conference. And shamelessly, the European Council said that the European Conference was going to debate the strategic agenda from June-July 2019. That's something that relates to the past rather than the future. So this is the unmoving vision that they have. And you find that not just in Council, because the debate this morning led us to understand that here in Parliament, in all groups too, there are unchanging positions. That's the first vision. The second vision then is the one that I would call innovative. And you can see this in the Socialist Group document in the 4 or 5 essential points. A large part of it is in the European Parliament resolution. Very little of it is found in the Commission text of 22nd of January. And this position states quite clearly that we must go beyond the institutional balance that exists today, that the conference should be a place for establishing powers and not for established powers. And the all-inclusive member states principle should not be focused on. Rather, we should have a different approach. And then, if we want to respect the principle that is written in the preamble to the German Constitution, where it states that the Constitution should be created based on the people, then we can't cite principles according to which the results of the conference would mean giving everything into the hands of the European Council. We must be coherent with the 4 or 5 essential points in the Socialist November document. So, the conference should discuss the future of Europe and not current policies. And in the conference, in a way, some kind of consensus should emerge according to which, and this is said in the Socialist document, we must recognize the leading role of the European Parliament. And this means that a profound institutional reform is needed, as stated by the Socialist Group, and that means changing the treaties. To be frank, to change the treaties, we need to understand who should change them. That's the European Parliament, in fact. It should, via the conclusions within the conference, build an agreement with all national parliaments, because national parliaments and the European Parliament represent the ensemble of representative democracy. So, in the conference, we should see the emergence of an agreement, and then from this agreement, we should see the emergence of the leadership role of the European Parliament, and then in turn, the European Parliament should draw up a constitutional project vis-à-vis 2024. The referendum in 1989 that you mentioned, this was at the start of the Federalist movement and the European Federalist movement. We should look at the 2024 elections and consider how these might be a pan-European referendum, so to speak. Altogether, citizens going out to vote will discuss this, and this is where the important role of European political parties comes into play. To date, they have violated and ignored Article 8 of the Lisbon Treaty, which states that the European citizens' conscience should be informed and that their demands should be respected. That's Article 10. So, European elections should be a place where the project can be discussed to reform the Union and the constitutive power and the treaties, etc. A kind of a pan-European referendum. I think that's the roadmap that we should work on. The European Parliament should revolt. I hope to see some kind of change vis-à-vis the Croatian text from the 28th January General Affairs Council conclusions. In a way that kind of ignored the idea of participatory democracy. So I hope that in the days to come and the weeks to come, the Parliament will react strongly against the unmoving stance of Council and maintain the balance between the institutions today, which is unacceptable. It wants to give the conference the power of current policies and not those beyond those of policies. So the Parliament must react strongly, and I hope that we see a new line. We have people who are not changing, but we see that there are 3 areas. We have a minority of people who don't change, a minority of people who innovate, and then we have the last part, the majority. Spinelli won in the past because the Spinelli project conquered the majority. and they lost the innovators and the people who didn't change. But I hope that in the European Parliament you'll manage to achieve the majority. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Pier Virgilio, because you have been able to deliver your speech just before the end of the interpretation. But I want to thank the interpreters for staying with us until the very end and for their hard work. And I think, Virgilio, you're very right. I think we have to take into account the election in 2024 to the European Parliament as a possible foundation moment or constituent moment, no? That will come after the conference and maybe, the other steps to which Francisco Aldecoa referred. So now we will proceed only in English, but we still have one speaker, and then we'll have time for debate. I see another MEP that has joined the discussion. So without further ado, I give the floor to Professor Olivier Costa of the College of Europe in Bruges for his presentation. So please.
Thank you very much. I was instructed to speak in French, but nevertheless I can make it in English, if it's better. There is sort of a tradition for me to come to hearings of the Socialist Party and not being able to speak, but I mean, it's fun anyway. What I wanted to come back to is about the Conference on the Future of Europe, and been brainstorming with some colleagues from the civil society, some in that room, about the ways to be sure that the conference would lead to real changes. And this has been addressed already by several persons. Many people are focusing on the way to have a conference that makes sense, that is not only an exercise to legitimize some changes over the legislation and the treaty. And I think it's a very important point, and the European Parliament has been already pushing very much to include as much as possible the civil society in the process. But then there is something else. There is how do we transform what has been proposed by the conference in concrete reforms. And there are two levels of reforms. There are legislative reforms that can be undertaken already by this commission if they are simple reform. Maybe by the next one if they are major reform. Magnette was talking earlier about the need for the European Union to fight against poverty. You have been mentioning the need to change the system of multi-annual budgeting and to frame it now with election. These are major changes that will certainly need more time. And then there is another side, which are all the constitutional changes or treaty changes. And I think that a major risk is there, because we don't have a simple solution to change the treaty without taking the risk of the constitutional treaty syndrome, I mean having the treaty rejected in one or several member states. This has happened for the Treaty of Maastricht, for the Treaty of Nice, for the Treaty of Lisbon, and obviously for the constitutional treaty, and I think we need a method to address that issue. So I think that there are three levels here of change. There is, first of all, the question of the change about the Act of 1976 about how to elect the European Parliament and to choose the Commission. In my view, this should not be part of the conference. The European Parliament has been working on that issue for now nearly 60 years. A lot of work has been done in the last time. We were all expecting a change of the rules for the last election. That did not occur. I think it is not worth now starting the debate all over again. The European Parliament has a right to take the initiative on that and should be proposing something to have the transnational list and a formalization of the Spitzenkandidaten, and maybe also more support for European parties that should in a way be privileged in that election. The European Parliament already has thought about that, but we can certainly think about other systems to impose a central role for European parties in that election, not only for the 10% of people on the transnational list, but also for the others. And here it's the AFCO committee that needs to work. The second thing is the conference itself, linked in those towards legislative changes. And here I totally agree with what has been said by the other members. We need something which is really open with no taboo to really make sense out of that conference and to give to citizens the feeling that it's not only a procedure. And then certainly, and I hope, we need a new treaty. But then we start with the real problems, because if we want a new treaty, then we need an IGC, or we need a convention, and we need a central role for the European Council, and we need to go through the process of ratification in the member states. And in some country, we will get a referendum because it's compulsory by the constitution, or because it will be again a political choice by the leader, as it was in France already a couple of times. So I have nothing against referendum as a tool of democracy, but they're problematic when it comes to a treaty, because it's an oversimplification of the stakes. Citizens are answering other questions than those that are asked. Very often it's a test for the government, and very often there is a feeling of blackmail by citizens, because it's take it or leave it. Take that treaty of 200 pages or nothing. And it lacks subtlety in my view. I think that there is a solution to that issue, to avoid the situation of having a conference, a treaty change, and then difficulties in the process of ratification. This is to make the EU institution function as political institution. Ms. Rodriguez already underlined the need for the institution to really be in charge of discussing about the budget, for instance, to link that with European election. We have election, we have a majority, we have a program, and then we have a budget which is adapted to that. And budget should not be just left to discussion within the European Council. I think it should be the same for a potential treaty change, because if you compare an election to a referendum, an election allows for subtlety. You can have a sophisticated debate. You can have the citizen who have the feeling that something is going on, that choices are made, and it's not only take it or leave it. So in my view, and in our view, and I see Giorgio in the room here, the idea would be to have the conference running until 2022, but not rush to get a treaty and to have that ratified, because in my view, there is a huge risk of a failure and several referendums that would be lost, or even parliamentary ratification lost in several countries. What we should do is having that debate, having real proposal on the table, sketches for Europe as we propose. Maybe not a fully fledged proposal, maybe several contrasted solution and proposal, and we need to accept also proposal that will go in the direction of less integration, maybe, if this is the will expressed by people within the conference. And then we open a real debate on those proposals. And we prepare for the next election, 2024, and we make that potential treaty change a central discussion within that campaign, with the Spitzenkandidaten, with the transnational list, with a major role for European political parties. And then through those European elections, we'll have some choices made, because we can expect after the election of 2024 of having a coalition emerging like we had last year, like we had in 2014, making choices also for the constitutional issues. And then we could start with a convention or an IGC with a clear mandate by the European electors saying those are the preferences of the parties who want the election. This is the roadmap to change the treaty. We organize the treaty based on that mandate, the treaty change. And at that condition, I guess that it would be easier to have a ratification of that treaty, because there would not be that feeling in the member states that the treaty is once again imposed by some Brussels convention or IGC or by the European Council, but that the treaty is the result of a constitutional sequence where there were real discussion on that issue. The problem is that it takes time. This sends us to 2025, but we don't have the feeling that it is such a long period of time if it allows us to finally have a deep reform of the treaty, and if it gives a bit more guarantees of success in ratification with the creation of that political momentum towards a treaty ratification. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Costa. Apologies for not being able to deliver the presentation in French, but fortunately we have overrun the limit of the interpretation. But I think you made your points very well, and I think it's an interesting approach that we have to consider. I will not favor, in any case, lower integration because, in the end, this is a conference for going forward. We should not allow this exercise to be hijacked by the enemies of Europe, national populists, to say that the open debate also includes going backwards. I think that, and the Parliament's resolution made it very clear when it said that the conference will be carried out, in our view, in the spirit of ever closer union. So it's not to go backwards in the integration process because, in a way, goes against the what constitutionalists call the intangibility clause. No? So it's, but very interesting approach on the timeline. And now we open up the debate. So please, I give the floor to anyone in the room, MEP or not MEP, for contributions. Keep it short so we can have also reactions from the panel. Giorgio?
Thank you. Apologies, I had to dash off from the meeting. Some of you know I'm responsible for a call on coronavirus, which has been made by the Commission to have researchers work on it. We have 10 times more requests than we expected, so I think it has a success among researchers, but we have to deal with it. I perceive that one of the key issues which will come with the conference is linked to this double nature of the reform that has to be done. As Olivier recalled, the constitutional one, which is in your power of the MEP, and I really pledge, be ambitious, push for an ambitious electoral law. You are asking, I'm working for the Commission, I'm also a member of the European Federalists, and I know the Parliament has always asked for having the right of initiative. Well, for the electoral law, you have it. So take it and really be bold, because beware, I feel the Council is less and less enthusiastic with lists and Spitzenkandidaten. So you can be more enthusiastic, and I feel that some of the groups which have opposed it can be enthusiastic, and you can be enthusiastic today, tomorrow. Why not having a resolution adopted by the 9 May 2020 to mark the 7th year? I know that 3 months is extremely short. Francesco tells me it's impossible. Well, go for it. Huh? It's possible to do that, and then make a real separation with the constituent moment, which will come and then open the debate, and that is what the conference should be about. I think we should not let the conference reopen things which have been discussed for 20 or 30 years. You can go in parallel, get support from it, but I like very much your conclusion, Dominic. It's as much as possible have open debates, but remind that we are in the European Union, so we should try to go forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Giorgio. I know Gabi can answer that, but if we can collect maybe two, three questions. No more questions? Yes. At the back.
Good morning, Justus Schönler, working with Barbara Duden at the Committee of the Regions. One question that didn't come up now is that in the Parliament resolution there was a very clear commitment to the citizens' agoras, which are not mentioned in that way and that form in the other two institutions' responses. So I wanted to see, because I think one of the key challenges will indeed be how to connect the decentralized debates that we want all over Europe to then a European level process, and I think that it's very clear. So again, it's a question on the mechanics, so to speak, on the governance of the process, how to bring those together and how much that will be an element of your fight with the other institutions.
I think that will be for Gabi as well, but I don't know if we can have a third. Okay, so Gabi.
I totally agree. I think we will have a parallel process. We have to do our work in the Parliament, in the AFCO anyway, and we are ready to do that. But what we want to do is to have the parallel process of these debates and to take the citizens with us on this way, because this will be essential. If you don't have the governments with you, try to get the citizens with you. It seems to be a good approach in this endeavor to do it and to explain that if you want more democracy and more transparency and not backroom deals, then we need a change of the electoral law, and we need it urgent. And here we also have time frames. We cannot just discuss and discuss, because the next elections will be 2024, and if we don't have these changes ready to be implemented until, I would say, spring or early summer 2022, it will not be in place for the next elections. And I wouldn't go back to go to an election and to face what a lot of people said, you promised us with our vote that we would decide, and then it's just nebbish. They say, it's not valid anymore. And I think this will be essential, that we also try to have this consensus on these essential reforms of the electoral law, and to have a very clear procedure that cannot be bypassed by some heads of government. And the second point, and I think this will be an essential point, the way we concepted the Citizens' Agora are very important. And it's the key difference to the proposal of the Council. Because we said, if we select European citizens by lot, and we gave criteria so that they represent the whole European society, we will have all different voices of society. It will not only be European enthusiasts. It will be also people with skepticism. But this will be important to bring it in. But then we said we need feedback loops. So the Citizens' Agoras come up with proposals, and these proposals they will present to the institutional panel, and they will also get the feedback in the end. Why were certain proposals taken on board? Maybe also why were certain proposals not taken on board? And to explain it to them, and this would give a different legitimacy to the proposals. Everyone here said we need concrete proposals at the end. And the concept of the Council is very simple. Have broad debates, not so many European debates, more national, organized debates, and then have no concrete outcome. Have lists of proposals given to the European Council, and, I quote, they do a report. We had that. I encourage you to read the report to the European Council on the last citizens' involvement. This will be a process that will not have at the end any concrete proposals. And I agree, we have to be careful, because what we are doing is not a convention, but it's the preheating period for a convention, also to test how much appetite is there in society, is there with citizens for the changes we are talking about, either treaty changes or also changes in policies. And therefore, I think that the debate about the architecture is a debate, in reality, a fight on what outcomes are possible, or by a certain structure, I prevent that there will be, in the end, concrete outcomes. And this is the battle where we are standing. It's a crucial point, because otherwise we will not have what we want is that Europe refocuses on its strength, and that it faces its weaknesses and changes it to be a strong player again. But what the Council proposes, in my view, is business as usual and just a nice new decoration, a conference of Europe. And I think we have to support them, that they can develop more courage to go along, and to not let it happen that this will be another wave of citizens' dialogues that in the end are not meant to have really concrete outcomes and to take citizens serious in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabi. I myself, my capacity as a coordinator, fully agree with you that on the reform of the electoral law, we are going to move forward in the Committee of Constitutional Affairs. Of course, the conference can debate about transnational lists. They are more than welcome to do so, but obviously that cannot be a ploy to delay a process that, as you very well said, is going to take the 5 years of the Parliament. We cannot wait until the end of the conference to start working on this legislative dossier, which is our competence, as Giorgio very well said. So, and also what you said on the Citizens Agora. Maybe just one, I know Marie-Jo wants to intervene, but on the question of the referenda, I'm also very worried of referenda because they most of the time are used to give an answer to the question that is not being asked. No? Thinking on clearly that's my interpretation at least of the French referendum in 2005, no? And also the Dutch referendum, which was, if you remember, mostly driven by the question of migration, which was not really at the heart of, you mentioned that was not even in the branch of policies, was not updated in the Lisbon Treaty. But maybe there is a difference to be made in response to what Dastoli and Costa said between national referenda and a pan-European referendum alongside the European election, or to consider the European election in itself, no, an informal referendum on a constitutional project that is being put forward to the European public. So I think there is a bit of room, maybe a room of maneuver, no, in that context. But now, Marie-Jo.
Also to intervene in the discussion which is happening now, because Gabi raised the issue of what should be the political strategy to move forward. This is extremely important. My assumption is that the task of this conference should be to come up with an agenda as precise as possible on the way the European Union should work in the future to deliver what is necessary. But then, imagine that the conference comes up with a powerful agenda. We need to make this happen. And this is the problem now we are discussing. And look, I completely agree with already the opinions expressed that when it comes implications for treaty changes, we learn from the past that submitting this to a direct referendum is extremely risky. Nevertheless, we know that we need the strength coming from citizens to create the conditions for a big change. So how can we get this strength? I see two ways. One is on developing a powerful method to consult them all over the conference, to define the agenda. And second, yes, I agree, should happen during European elections. Not in the sense of voting a detailed agenda, but in the sense of voting the main references, which should then be used by the upcoming European Parliament to do its job. So this is exactly your idea. I think this makes sense. So I think this talk has been very useful to define the right sequence. But I would like to draw your attention for another problem. We also have very different opinions among European citizens. And sometimes we even have not only lack of information, prejudices, wrong ideas, even between countries. So we need to invent a method to allow us to understand much better each other. The famous oppositions between people from the north, the south, the west, they exist. We cannot just assume that they don't exist, they exist. And so we need to have, on one hand, actors to make the bridge, and we need to have opportunities for these citizens to know each other and to understand each other. How can we do this? By the way, we design the meeting moments, this cannot just be limited to meetings in particular countries. No, we need to have transnational meetings. First thing. Then, the role of media, the famous European public sphere. We are so far from this. We need to have much stronger European media. And then, of course, the European political parties or the European think tanks can also help.
Of course.
So we cannot underestimate this problem. There are differences among European citizens. So we need to build much stronger bridge. Also because we have the linguistic problem. This is not the United States of America. So.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I don't know if a last word, no, from Professors Aldecoa and Onita, or from Professor Costa and Mr. Dastoli? No? No last comment?
Only say one thing, because we spoke about referendum. Because normally in the newspapers we read always that when the citizens in Europe are asked, they normally react in a negative way. We have had in Europe 39 referendum in the history, from the first in the United Kingdom on the last. 7 referendum were negative and 32 were positive. So it's not true that normally when we ask citizens to react, they react in a negative way. In the majority of the cases of the referendum in Europe, the 32 referendum on 39 were positive. So we can inform the journalists that when they write these things, they write fake news. That is not true that the citizens normally they react in a negative way. Second point, as you said, in some countries the referendum is juridically or politically binding. From my point of view, to put the citizens all on an equal foot, it could be good to have a pan-European referendum, not individual referendum in the different states. If you have a pan-European referendum, that means that we have a transnational debate. And in the transnational debate, the pro-Europeans will be stronger than the anti-Europeans, because the anti-Europeans are divided in their country. So the pan-European referendum has also the added value that we can develop a real European debate, pushing the political parties, as Valerio Onida said, that can play a role at European level. These two elements, I think that we have to think about these two elements.
Olivier?
Yeah, just very briefly. Usually, we teach the students that European parties don't have the same functions as national parties, because there's a world literature explaining what the parties are supposed to do, and European parties are very specific. What European parties are not supposed to do is to educate citizens, to socialize them, to explain them concept, ideas, etc., etc. I think now it's turn for European parties to take that role in charge, because the conference is going to be a disaster if we don't have structures like the European Party to go towards the citizens and the National Party to explain the stakes, to explain the challenge, to explain the concept. Otherwise, people will just get lost. And once again, it will be a debate only located in Brussels between knowledgeable people.
Well, thank you very much for the last inputs. I think it has been a very valuable discussion. We will continue perfecting our group paper. We'll try to have a wider discussion among the entire S&D group, and we will be in touch for the follow-up. And I want to thank you, all of you that have stayed with us until the very end. I hope you have a good takeaway of the giveaway, I think it's called, of the conference. And also thank you to the MEPs that have stayed with us throughout. Estrella Dura from the Spanish delegation. I see Mia Petra from the Finnish delegation is still with us. Barbara Duden from the previous panel that has stayed with us. So thanks again to all of you, and we will keep you posted about the next step.
I think it was very good.
Very interesting, very enlightening. No? We have lots of ideas, and we have now to